In the fog-choked shadows of a London night, a sapphire as radiant as a fallen star vanishes from a locked case, surrounded by 200 revelers at Lord Ashbourne's grand ball. Who dared to steal the priceless Star Sapphire under the watchful eyes of guards and guests? Was it the Russian count with a serpent's smile, the opera diva hiding secrets in her song, or a traitor closer to home? As Sherlock Holmes lights his pipe and steps into the mystery, one question burns brighter than the gem itself. In a web of deceit, where does the truth hide? Chapter 1. The Vanishing Gem. The fog clung to Baker Street like a conspirator, its tendrils curling around the gas lamps, softening their amber glow to a ghostly murmur. Inside 221B, the fire crackled with a defiant warmth, casting shadows that danced across the cluttered room, books strewn across the table, chemical apparatus glinting in the corner, and the faint strains of a violin lingering in the air, though Sherlock Holmes had set the instrument aside an hour ago. I, Dr. John Watson, sat in my armchair, attempting to lose myself in a medical journal, but my attention wandered, drawn inexorably to my friend, who stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the mist. Holmes's eyes, keen as a hawk's, scanned the street below. "A carriage approaches, Watson," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if the fog itself might overhear. "A brougham," by the sound of the wheels. "2 horses, one slightly lame, and the driver is impatient note." The whips crack. I lowered my journal, accustomed to these pronouncements yet ever intrigued. "A client, then?" I ventured. "Undoubtedly," Holmes replied, turning from the window with a faint smile. "And one of some urgency, if the hour and the haste are any indication." The clock on the mantel showed 9:30, an unusual time for visitors, even in our unconventional household. A sharp rap at the door confirmed his prediction. Mrs. Hudson, our steadfast landlady, ushered in a man whose appearance bespoke wealth and distress in equal measure. He was tall, with a bearing that suggested military discipline softened by years of luxury. His frock coat, impeccably tailored, bore the faintest trace of cigar ash on the cuff, and his face, lined with worry, was framed by silver hair swept back from a high forehead. In his hand he clutched a gold-topped cane, which he leaned upon as if it were an anchor. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired, his voice trembling with suppressed agitation. "I am he," Holmes replied, gesturing to a chair. "And this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. Pray, be seated, Lord Ashbourne." The man started, his eyes widening. "You know my name?" Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Your crest is embossed on your cane, and the morning papers mentioned Lord Reginald Ashbourne's gala last night at Ashbourne Hall. The urgency of your visit suggests a matter tied to that event. But please enlighten us." Lord Ashbourne sank into the chair, his composure fraying. "It is the Star Sapphire," he said, the words tumbling out. "Stolen, Mr. Holmes, from a locked case in my ballroom, in the midst of 200 guests. A gem worth a king's ransom, gone without a trace. I am ruined unless it is recovered." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes alight with that peculiar intensity that signaled his mind was already at work. "Begin at the beginning, Lord Ashbourne. Omit no detail, however trivial it may seem." The nobleman drew a shuddering breath. "The Star Sapphire is an heirloom, a flawless gem the size of a quail's egg, cut to reflect light like a constellation. It has been in my family for generations, displayed only on rare occasions. Last night, I hosted a ball to celebrate my daughter's engagement to Captain Harold Waverley. The sapphire was the centerpiece, locked in a glass case in the ballroom, under guard. At midnight, I went to show it to a few esteemed guests, only to find the case empty. The lock was intact, the glass unbroken. It was as if the gem had vanished into the ether." Holmes's fingers steepled beneath his chin. The guard, what of him? Jenkins, my most trusted man. He swears he never left his post, save for a moment to fetch a glass of water. He saw nothing, heard nothing. And the guests? Holmes pressed. Their demeanor, their movements. A mix of London's elite and foreign dignitaries, Ashbourne replied. The Russian ambassador, Count Orlov, was present, as was Madame Carlotta Bellini, the retired opera singer, and Mr. Ezra Finch, a jeweler of some repute. They were all enchanted by the sapphire earlier in the evening, but none approached the case after the dancing began. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And yet someone did. Tell me of the case itself, its construction, its lock. Crafted by a Swiss artisan, reinforced glass, with a lock requiring 2 keys, one of which I keep on my person, the other in my study safe. Both keys are accounted for, and the lock shows no signs of tampering. Holmes rose abruptly, his energy galvanizing the room. Watson, my coat, we must see Ashbourne Hall at once. The scene of a crime speaks louder than any witness. The journey to Ashbourne Hall, nestled in the leafy outskirts of London, was a silent one, save for the clatter of hooves and the creak of the carriage. Lord Ashbourne stared out the window, his face a mask of despair, while Holmes sat opposite, his mind evidently racing through possibilities. I, as ever, felt the familiar thrill of a new case, tempered by the weight of our client's distress. The hall itself was a monument to grandeur, its Palladian facade glowing under the moon's pale light. Inside, the ballroom was a vision of opulence, chandeliers dripping with crystal, walls adorned with gilded mirrors, and a marble floor polished to a mirror's sheen. The guests had long departed, leaving an eerie stillness, broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. Holmes made straight for the display case, a sleek structure of glass and brass, standing alone on a velvet-draped pedestal. He knelt, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the lock. Curious, he murmured. A faint scratch, barely visible, along the edge of the keyhole. Not the work of a pick, but something finer, perhaps a watchmaker's tool. I peered over his shoulder. Could it have been forced? Holmes shook his head. The lock is pristine, save for this mark. The thief was skilled, Watson, and patient. He sniffed the air, his brow furrowing. Lavender. Faint, but unmistakable. Not a scent one expects in a ballroom. Lord Ashbourne, hovering nearby, clasped his hands. Does it mean anything, Mr. Holmes? Everything means something, Holmes replied, his tone clipped. He circled the case, his eyes darting to the floor, the walls, the nearby windows. The windows were locked? Bolted from within, Ashbourne confirmed, and the guards patrolled the grounds all night. Holmes paused, his gaze settling on a smudge on the marble floor, nearly invisible against the polished surface. He knelt again, scraping a sample with a small knife. Mud, Watson, with a trace of red clay. Not native to this estate, I wager. The thief was careless or hurried. He stood, his expression one of quiet triumph. Lord Ashbourne, assemble your staff and any guests still on the premises. The thief is likely among them, and I intend to find them before they slip away. The staff, a mix of footmen, maids, and the stoic Jenkins, gathered in the ballroom, their faces a tableau of curiosity and unease. Holmes moved among them like a predator, his questions sharp and precise. Jenkins, you left your post for water. Where did you fetch it? The kitchen, sir, Jenkins replied, his voice steady but his eyes flickering. I was gone but a minute. And you saw no one near the case upon your return? No one, sir. The room was full of dancers. Holmes turned to a young maid, her hands twisting in her apron. You girl, what is your name? Eliza, sir, she stammered. I was serving wine all evening. Did you notice anyone lingering near the case? Anyone who seemed out of place? Eliza hesitated, then shook her head. No, sir, but I did see a gentleman drop his handkerchief near there. He picked it up quick-like, but I thought it odd. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Describe him. Tall, sir, with a foreign-look, dark beard, heavy brows. He wore a red waistcoat, very fine. Holmes nodded, dismissing her with a wave. He approached the guests next, a smaller group who had stayed the night due to the late hour. Among them were Count Orlov, whose imperious demeanor barely masked a nervous glance. Madame Bellini, her opera-trained voice dripping with charm as she deflected questions. And Ezra Finch, the jeweler, whose fingers fidgeted with a pocket watch. Count Orlov, Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. You admired the sapphire. Earlier. Did you return to view it later in the evening? The Count's mustache twitched. I did not. I was engaged in conversation with Lady Ashbourne until midnight. And you, Madame Bellini? Holmes turned to the singer, whose eyes sparkled with defiance. I danced, Mr. Holmes, as all saw. The sapphire was a trifle compared to the knight's. Gaiety. Holmes's gaze shifted to Finch, who flinched under its weight. Mr. Finch, your expertise in gems is well known. Did you examine the case closely? Finch's voice was thin. Only from a distance, sir. A marvel, that stone, but I had no cause to approach it. Holmes stepped back, his expression unreadable. Very well. Watson, Lord Ashbourne, we shall reconvene tomorrow. I have seen enough for tonight. As we returned to the carriage, I could contain my curiosity no longer. Holmes, what have you deduced? The scratch, the lavender, the clay, what? Does it all mean? Holmes lit his pipe, the glow illuminating his sharp features. The scratch suggests a tool of precision, not brute force. The lavender points to a woman or a man clever enough to use a woman's scent as a disguise. The clay narrows our search to someone who traveled from a specific region, likely south of London. And the handkerchief, Watson, is a thread we shall pull until the tapestry unravels. But the thief, I pressed. You said they're still here. Holmes exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes glinting. Indeed, Watson. The footprint, the scent, the handkerchief ill, point to a guest who has not yet fled. Tomorrow we shall tighten the noose. The carriage rattled back toward London, the fog thicker now, as if conspiring to hide the truth. Yet I knew, with a certainty born of years at Holmes's side, that the Star Sapphire's thief would not elude him for long. The game was afoot, and the first move had been made. Satisfying end. Holmes's discovery of the smudged footprint, coupled with his cryptic assurance that the thief remains among the guests, provides a thrilling conclusion to the chapter, leaving a reader eager for the next step in the investigation. Chapter 2. The masquerade of motives, the grand ballroom of Ashbourne Manor glittered under the weight of 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in the crystal chandeliers like captive stars. The air was thick with the mingled scents of rosewater, cigar smoke, and the faint, lingering trace of lavender that Sherlock Holmes had noted at the scene of the crime. The Star Sapphire, a gem of celestial blue, had vanished from its locked display case not 2 hours prior, and now the room buzzed with the nervous chatter of guests, their masks of civility barely concealing the undercurrents of suspicion. Holmes stood near the edge of the ballroom, his lean frame half hidden in the shadow of a marble pillar, his eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a hawk. Dr. John Watson, ever his steadfast companion, stood beside him, his brow furrowed as he tried to keep pace with Holmes's unspoken thoughts. Remarkable, isn't it, Watson? Holmes murmured, his voice low but sharp. A room full of secrets, each guest a cipher wrapped in silk and velvet. The thief is here among them, and they know it. Watson adjusted his collar, uncomfortable in the stiff formality of his evening attire. But how can you be so certain, Holmes? The sapphire was in a locked case, the key in Lord Ashbourne's possession. Couldn't it have been an outsider? Someone who slipped in during the chaos of the ball? Holmes's lips curled into a faint, almost predatory smile. A scratch on the case, Watson. Too precise for a brute's hand, too subtle for an amateur. And that scent lavender, not the common variety, but something rare, distilled. No, this was no common thief. The culprit is here, hiding behind a mask of decorum. We shall unmask them by their own contradictions. Watson nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. Where do we begin, then? There must be 50 people here, and every one of them looks as guilty as the next. Holmes's gaze settled on a cluster of guests near the center of the room. We begin with the most interesting. Come, Watson. Let us test the waters. They moved through the crowd, Holmes gliding with the ease of a man who belonged everywhere and nowhere, while Watson trailed, his soldier's gait less suited to the polished floor. Their first target was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crimson waistcoat, his face half hidden by a domino mask adorned with gold filigree. His laughter boomed across the room, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying a man ill at ease. Count Dmitri Volkov, Holmes said under his breath as they approached. Russian diplomat, recently arrived in London. Rumored to have a penchant for rare gems and a less-than-spotless reputation in St. Petersburg. The Count was holding court among a small group of admirers, his voice thick with a Slavic accent as he recounted a tale of a Siberian wolf hunt. Holmes stepped into the circle, his presence commanding attention without effort. Count Volkov, Holmes said, his tone polite but edged with steel. A splendid evening, is it not? Though I imagine the loss of Lord Ashbourne's sapphire has cast a shadow over the festivities. The Count's laughter faltered, and his eyes narrowed behind the mask. A tragedy, Mr. Holmes, Sherlock Holmes. And this is my associate, Dr. Watson. The Count's gaze flicked to Watson, then back to Holmes, assessing. Holmes, yes, I've heard of you. A man who sees what others miss. But surely you don't suspect one of us? We are all guests of Lord Ashbourne, bound by honor. Honor, Holmes repeated, as if tasting the word. A curious thing, honor. It bends under pressure, does it not? Tell me, Count, did you admire the Star Sapphire before its unfortunate disappearance? Volkov's hand tightened briefly on his glass of champagne. I saw it, yes, a magnificent stone. But I am no thief, Mr. Holmes. My interests lie in diplomacy, not larceny. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Of course. Though I couldn't help but notice your handkerchief, Count, monogrammed with a V in gold thread, and scented, if I'm not mistaken, with a rather distinctive lavender. The Count's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. A gift from a friend in Moscow. Lavender is common enough, is it not? Not this variety, Holmes said softly. It's cremine, I believe. Rare even among connoisseurs. Curious that it matches the scent lingering near the display case. The group around them had gone silent, their eyes darting between Holmes and Volkov. The Count forced a smile, but it was a brittle thing, like ice about to crack. A coincidence, Mr. Holmes. I assure you, I was nowhere near the case tonight. Holmes inclined his head as if conceding the point, but Watson knew better. The seed of doubt had been planted, and Holmes would nurture it until it bore fruit. Moved on, leaving the Count to his uneasy laughter. Watson leaned close. Do you think he's the thief, Holmes? Not yet, Watson, but he's hiding something. That handkerchief wasn't a gift, it's too new, the stitching too precise. And his left hand, did you notice? A faint tremor when I mentioned the lavender. He's nervous, but whether it's guilt or something else, we shall see. Their next stop was a woman in a gown of emerald silk, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. Madame Celeste Duval, a retired opera singer whose voice had once captivated Europe, now lived in semi-reclusion, her appearances rare and her motives opaque. She stood alone near a window, her gloved hands clasped tightly, her eyes distant. "Madame Duval," Holmes said, bowing slightly, "a pleasure to see you grace Lord Ashbourne's ball. I trust you enjoyed the display of the Star Sapphire before its untimely vanishing?" Her eyes, sharp despite her age, met his. "Mr. Holmes, I presume? Your reputation precedes you." "Yes, I saw the sapphire." "A beautiful thing, but beauty is fleeting, is it not?" "I've learned that in my years on the stage." "Indeed?" Holmes sighed, his voice smooth as silk. "Though some treasures are worth preserving. Tell me, madame, did you notice anything unusual tonight? A guest out of place, perhaps, or a conversation that struck you as odd?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her fan. "I keep to myself, Mr. Holmes. People are tiresome, and their dramas predictable. But there was a man, earlier, near the display case. He seemed overly interested in the sapphire, though I couldn't see his face clearly. He wore a black cloak, lined with red." Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. "A black cloak, you say? Most distinctive. And did this man speak to anyone?" "Not that I saw," she replied, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But he moved with purpose, as if he knew exactly what he was doing." Watson scribbled a note in his pocketbook, his heart quickening. A lead, however vague, was better than none. Holmes, however, seemed unsatisfied, his gaze lingering on Madame Duval's gloves. "A fine choice of attire, madame. Silk gloves, embroidered with a rose pattern. Unusual for a ball, don't you think? They seem more suited to handling delicate objects. Or perhaps concealing something." Her lips parted and closed, and for a moment Watson thought she might faint. But she recovered quickly, her smile tight. "You are observant, Mr. Holmes. These gloves are a memento for my days in Paris, nothing more." Holmes nodded, but his eyes told Watson he was far from convinced. As they moved away, Watson whispered, "She seemed rattled, Holmes. Do you think she's involved?" "Possibly," Holmes said, his voice low. "Her gloves are new despite her claim of sentimentality. And that hesitation, she saw more than she's telling. But she's not our thief. Her hands are too steady, her demeanor too composed for someone who's just committed a crime of such audacity." The night wore on, and Holmes wove through the crowd like a thread through a tapestry, each conversation a stitch in the pattern he was unraveling. The third figure of interest was Mr. Isles Finch, a jeweler whose shop in Hatton Garden was known for its exquisite, if occasionally questionable, acquisitions. Finch was a small, wiry man with a nervous energy. His fingers constantly fidgeting with a pocket watch he kept pulling out and tucking away. "Mr. Finch," Holmes said, catching the jeweler as he tried to slip toward the refreshment table. "A moment, if you please. I understand you appraised the Star Sapphire for Lord Ashbourne before the ball. A remarkable stone by all accounts." Finch's eyes darted to Holmes, then away. Yes, quite remarkable. A flawless Star Sapphire. Cut in Ceylon, I believe. Worth a king's ransom. Terrible shame it's gone." "Terrible indeed," Holmes said, his tone deceptively mild. "You must have spent considerable time examining it. Did you notice anything about the display case? Its lock, perhaps, or its construction?" Finch's fingers fumbled with the watch, nearly dropping it. "The case? Oh, standard enough. Good craftsmanship, but nothing extraordinary. I'm no locksmith, Mr. Holmes." "No, of course not," Holmes said, his eyes fixed on Finch's hands. "But you are a man of detail, Mr. Finch. I couldn't help but notice your watch chain, a fine piece, with a charm shaped like a key. Symbolic, perhaps?" Finch laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Symbolic? No, just a trinket. A gift from a client. Holmes's smile was thin. A client with a taste for locksmithing, perhaps? Or one who knows the value of a well-placed key? Finch paled, his hand closing around the watch as if to hide it. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Holmes. I'm just a jeweler, here to enjoy the ball. Of course, Holmes said, stepping back. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Finch. As they moved away, Watson leaned in. He's as jittery as a cat in a storm, Holmes. That watch chain, do you think it's a clue? A clue, perhaps, Holmes said, his eyes scanning the room. But not the key to our mystery. Finch's? Too clumsy, too obvious. The thief we seek is bolder, more calculated. But Finch knows something. His nervousness betrays him. The hours slipped by, and the ball reached its zenith, the music swelling as couples twirled across the floor. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his mind a crucible for the fragments of evidence he'd gathered. Watson, ever loyal, followed, his notebook filling with observations, the Count's lavender-scented handkerchief, Madame Duval's cryptic sighting, Finch's key-shaped charm. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive dot as the clock struck midnight. Holmes paused near a towering floral arrangement, his eyes catching a flicker of movement. A woman in a sapphire blue gown, her face obscured by a feathered mask, slipped a folded piece of paper into a vase, her movements swift and deliberate. Holmes's hand shot out, steadying Watson, who had nearly bumped into a passing guest. Did you see that? Holmes whispered, his voice taut with excitement. Watson nodded, his pulse quickening. Who is she? I don't know, Holmes said, his eyes never leaving the woman as she melted into the crowd. But she's given us our next move. With a deftness that belied his casual demeanor, Holmes approached the vase, his fingers retrieving the note with the precision of a surgeon. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the elegant script. Midnight. The alley behind St. Giles. Ring the star. Watson's breath caught. The sapphire, he whispered. She's involved. Holmes folded the note, tucking it into his pocket. Or she's a pawn in a larger game. Either way, Watson, the night is young and the chase is on. They slipped out of the ballroom, the music fading behind them as they stepped into the cool night air. The fog was rolling in, thick and gray, cloaking London in a shroud of mystery. Watson felt a thrill of anticipation, tempered by the weight of the unknown. The sapphire was out there, and so was the thief, hidden behind a masquerade of motives. Holmes, as always, was one step ahead, his mind already racing toward the alley behind St. Giles, where the next chapter of their adventure awaited. Chapter 3. The midnight rendezvous. The fog clung to London's cobbled streets like a conspirator, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant toll of a church bell. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson crouched behind a stack of crates in a narrow alley off Drury Lane, their breaths shallow in the damp, chill air. The note Holmes had retrieved from the vase at Lord Ashbourne's ball, a scrap of paper scrawled with midnight, Cutler's Alley, the star burned in his mind. The sapphire's trail had led them here, to this shadowed crevice of the city where secrets festered like damp rot. Holmes's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the alley's mouth. His long frame was taut, coiled like a spring, the brim of his cap pulled low to obscure his face. Watson, less accustomed to such clandestine vigils, shifted uncomfortably, his revolver a cold weight in his coat pocket. The scent of stale beer and whetstone hung heavy, mingling with the faint lavender trace Holmes had noted at the crime scene, a clue that refused to fade. Patience. Watson, Holmes murmured, his voice a low hum, barely disturbing the fog. The players in this drama are punctual. They will come. Watson nodded, though his nerves prickled. You're certain the note refers to the sapphire? The star could mean anything, a code, a person. Holmes's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. The star is the sapphire, Watson. Its celestial hue is unmistakable, and the thief's haste in arranging this meeting betrays their intent. To move it quickly. We are not chasing metaphors tonight. A faint scuff echoed from the alley's far end, and Holmes's hand shot up, silencing Watson. Two figures emerged from the mist, their silhouettes blurred but distinct. One tall and lean, cloaked in a dark greatcoat, the other shorter, hunched, with a sailor's rolling gait. They paused beneath a flickering gas lamp, its sickly light, casting long shadows. The taller figure's voice, low and clipped with a faint foreign accent, carried just enough to reach Holmes's ears. "The star is secure," the tall man said, his words precise, like a blade's edge. "But the buyer grows impatient. We must move it by dawn." The shorter man grunted, his voice rough as gravel. "Dawn? Risky, mate. Coppers are sniffing round the docks already. That Ashbourne toff's got pull." "Lord Ashbourne is a fool," the tall man snapped. "His sapphire is ours, and the order will have its due. Did you bring the terms?" The shorter man patted his coat, producing a folded paper. "Right here, but I don't like it, Victor. Too many eyes on us." Holmes's gaze sharpened at the name Victor, a piece of the puzzle slotted into place. He leaned closer to Watson, whispering, "The tall one is our Russian diplomat from the ball. Victor Rostov." The handkerchief with the Cyrillic monogram was his. Watson's eyes widened. The diplomat? But why risk his position for a theft? Greed, Watson, or something deeper. The order he mentioned, the saffron veil, perhaps. We shall see. The two men in the alley continued their exchange, oblivious to their audience. Rostov unfolded the paper, scanning it with a scowl. "The collector demands delivery in Calais. The midnight gale sails tomorrow night. Can you ensure the cargo is aboard?" The shorter man hesitated, scratching his stubbled jaw. But it'll cost extra. Smugglers don't work cheap, and Varkas don't trust easy." "Captain Varkas will be paid," Rostov said coldly. "See that he doesn't ask questions." Watson's breath caught. "Varkas," he mouthed, recalling the name from Holmes's. Earlier inquiries, a smuggler with a reputation for slipping through the tightest nets. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable but intent. The conversation in the alley grew tense. The shorter man, likely a dockhand or low-level fixer, shifted nervously. "What about the coppers?" "Word is that detective's poking around. The one with the funny hat." Holmes's smile was razor-thin. "My reputation precedes me?" Rostov's head snapped up, as if sensing a disturbance in the fog. "Enough," he hissed. "We're exposed here. Move the Star to the docks by midnight tomorrow. I'll handle the rest." The dockhand nodded, but his eyes darted to the shadows. Holmes tensed, sensing the man's unease. A moment later, disaster struck a loose cobble under Watson's boot. Shifted, scraping loudly against its neighbors. The sound was a gunshot in the silence. "Who's there?" Rostov barked, his hand diving into his coat. The dockhand spun, drawing a knife that gleamed dully in the gaslight. Holmes seized Watson's arm, pulling him deeper into the shadows. "Run," he whispered, his tone urgent but calm. They bolted, weaving through the crates as footsteps pounded. Behind them, the alley twisted like a serpent, its walls slick with grime. Holmes's mind raced, mapping their escape. He knew this part of London like a chessboard, every pawn and rook accounted for. Left. Holmes snapped, yanking Watson into a narrower side passage. The pursuer's shouts grew closer, Rostov's voice rising in a furious command. "Cut them off at the wharf." Watson's heart pounded, his military instincts kicking in. He glanced back, seeing the glint of the dockhand's knife as the man rounded a corner. "Holmes, they're gaining." "Keep moving," Holmes said, his voice steady as steel. He spotted a rusted ladder leading to a low rooftop warehouse, long abandoned. Up, they scrambled up the ladder, the metal groaning under their weight. On the roof, the fog was thicker, a ghostly shroud that hid them from view. Holmes crouched, scanning the alley below. Rostov and the dockhand appeared, their figures distorted by the mist. The dockhand cursed, kicking a crate, while Rostov stood motionless, his head tilted as if listening. "They're gone," the dockhand growled. "Bloody ghosts." Rostov's voice was ice. "Not ghosts. Him, the detective. He's closer than I thought." Watson, panting beside Holmes, whispered, "How did they know it was you?" "They didn't," Holmes replied, his eyes never leaving Rostov. "But they suspect. Fear sharpens the senses, Watson, and Rostov is afraid." Below, Rostov turned abruptly, his greatcoat flaring. As he did, something small fell from his pocket, glinting briefly before vanishing into the shadows. The two men retreated, their footsteps fading into the fog. Holmes waited, counting seconds, until silence reclaimed the alley. "Stay here," he told Watson, descending the ladder with cat-like grace. At the alley's edge, he knelt, his fingers brushing the damp stones until they closed around a small metallic object, a cufflink, engraved with a coiled serpent, its eyes two tiny emeralds. Holmes's expression darkened as he pocketed it. Watson joined him, peering at the find. "What is it?" "A signature," Holmes said. "The Order of the Saffron Veil. This cufflink confirms their involvement. The serpent is their emblem, a mark of their clandestine dealings." Watson frowned, his mind racing to keep up. "A secret society? Stealing gems?" "Not just gems," Holmes said, rising. "Power, influence. The sapphire is a means to an end, a currency for their ambitions. Rostov is no mere diplomat, he's their agent, and this cufflink ties him to their inner circle." A fog seemed to thicken, as if conspiring to shield the truth. Watson glanced at the alley's mouth, half expecting Rostov to reappear. "What now? They know we're on to them." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a hunter's intensity. "Now, Watson, we follow the serpent. The midnight gale is our next move. If the sapphire is to be smuggled, it will be aboard that ship. We must prepare." Watson nodded, his resolve hardening despite the chill in his bones. The chase had begun in earnest, and the sapphire's celestial glow seemed to pulse just beyond their grasp, a star in a fog-shrouded night. Holmes turned, his silhouette blending into the mist, and Watson followed, the cufflink's serpent coiling in his mind, a promise of deeper conspiracies yet to unravel. The alley fell silent once more, but the game was far from over. The fog had not relented by the time Holmes and Watson returned to Baker Street, the city's pulse muted under its heavy veil. The sitting room at 221 Lights was a sanctuary of warmth, the fire crackling as Holmes paced before it, the cufflink glinting in his hand. Watson sank into an armchair, his coat still damp, his mind replaying the alley's tense encounter. "Rostov is no amateur," Holmes said, pausing to examine the cufflink under a magnifying glass. His composure under pressure, the precision of his speech, he's trained, likely in espionage. The Order of the Saffron Veil is not a petty thieves' guild. Their reach extends beyond London, perhaps to the continent. Watson rubbed his hands, warming them. And the dockhand? He seemed less refined. "A tool," Holmes said dismissively. "A hired hand, useful for his knowledge of the docks, but expendable. Rostov is the key. His mention of the collector intrigues me. A figure of authority, perhaps the Order's leader." Watson frowned. "But why the sapphire? If they're after power, why not steal gold or documents?" Holmes's eyes flicked to the window, where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "The Star Sapphire is no ordinary gem. Its value lies not only in its rarity, but in its symbolism. To the order, it may be a talisman, a bargaining chip, or a key to some ritual we've yet to uncover. The ledger we'll find on the midnight. Gale will tell us more. Watson leaned forward, intrigued. You're certain the Sapphire's on that ship? As certain as the fog is thick, Holmes said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Rostov's urgency betrays him. He cannot afford to delay, not with us on his trail. The midnight gale sails tomorrow night, and we must be ready. Watson's stomach tightened at the thought of another nocturnal adventure, but excitement flickered beneath his apprehension. Holmes's mind was a machine, grinding through clues with relentless precision, and Watson felt the familiar thrill of being caught in its orbit. Rest? Watson, Holmes said, sensing his friend's fatigue. Tomorrow we'll need your steady hand and sharp eyes. The game is afoot, and the serpent is watching. As Watson retired to his room, the cuff-linked serpent lingered in his thoughts, its emerald eyes glinting with secrets. The sapphires. Trail was warm, but the fog of deception was thicker than ever. Holmes stood by the fire, his violin in hand, its first mournful note cutting through the silence, a prelude to the chase that awaited them. The next day dawned gray and heavy. London's skyline smudged by clouds that mirrored the city's mood. Holmes was already at work when Watson descended, poring over maps of the docks and a tattered volume on secret societies. The cufflink sat on the table, a silent accusation. The Order of the Saffron Veil, Holmes said without looking up, dates back to the 17th century, a cabal of alchemists and nobles obsessed with esoteric relics. They've resurfaced in recent decades, trading in stolen artifacts to fund their influence. The serpent is their mark, a symbol of wisdom and treachery. Watson poured himself a cup of tea, his mind still foggy from the previous night. And the sapphire? Is it one of their relics? Possibly, Holmes said, tracing a finger along a map of the Thames. Its origins are murky. Some say it was mined in Ceylon. Others claim it was a gift from an Indian prince to a British envoy. Its celestial hue has made it a legend, whispered about in occult circles. The Order would covet it not for its beauty, but for what it represents. Watson sipped his tea, grimacing at its bitterness. So we're dealing with fanatics? Fanatics. With resources, Holmes corrected. Rostov's diplomatic status gives him access to channels we cannot easily trace. The midnight gale, however, is our opportunity. Captain Varkas is a known smuggler, but he's cautious. We'll need to be clever. Holmes unfolded a detailed map of the docks, his finger tapping a spot near Wapping. The ship is moored here, at a private wharf controlled by Varkas's men. Security will be tight, but there's a weakness, a loading bay used for contraband. If we can infiltrate it, we may find the Sapphire before it sails. Watson studied the map, his military instincts stirring. A frontal assault won't do. Too many eyes. Precisely, Holmes said, his eyes alight. We'll need a disguise. A dock worker, perhaps, or a customs official. Something unremarkable, but authoritative. I'll handle the details. By evening, Holmes had transformed himself into a grizzled sailor, his face smudged with coal dust, his coat patched and worn. Watson, less convincingly, adopted the guise of a clerk, his spectacles and clipboard lending him an air of bureaucratic fussiness. They set out as dusk fell, the Thames a ribbon of ink under a sky bruised with clouds. The docks were a labyrinth of crates, ropes, and shouting men, the air thick with the tang of salt and tar. The midnight gale loomed ahead, its black hull gleaming weightly in the lamplight. Holmes moved with purpose, his sailor's gait convincing even to Watson's critical eye. They approached the loading bay, where two burly men stood guard, their eyes scanning the crowd. Holmes muttered something about a late shipment, his accent a perfect mimicry of a Limehouse docker. The guards waved him through, barely glancing at Watson, who clutched his clipboard like a shield. Inside the bay, crates were stacked high, their contents marked with cryptic symbols. Holmes's eyes darted over them, cataloging details with mechanical precision. "There," he whispered, nodding toward a crate tucked in a corner, its lid slightly askew. A faint lavender scent wafted from it, the same scent from the crime. "Seen." Watson's pulse quickened as Holmes knelt, prying the lid open with a quiet creak. Inside, nestled in straw, was a small wooden box, its surface carved with a serpent identical to the cufflink's design. Holmes's fingers brushed the carving, his expression unreadable. "The sapphire," he murmured, "or a decoy." Before he could open it, a shadow fell across them. A third guard, unnoticed until now, loomed in the doorway, his hand on a cudgel. "Oi, what's this then?" Holmes rose smoothly, his sailor's drawl returning. "Just checking the cargo, mate. Captain's orders." The guard's eyes narrowed. Captain didn't say nothing about no checks. "Who are you?" Watson's hand crept toward his revolver, but Holmes's glance stopped him. With a theatrical stumble, Holmes knocked over a crate, sending apples rolling across the floor. The guard cursed, lunging forward, and Holmes seized the moment, tripping him with a deft foot. The man hit the ground hard, stunned. "Run!" Holmes hissed, grabbing the wooden box. They sprinted from the bay, the guard shouts echoing behind them. The docks erupted into chaos as more men joined the pursuit, their boots pounding like war drums. Holmes led Watson through a maze of crates, ducking under ropes and leaping over barrels. The box clutched tightly under his arm. They reached a narrow pier, the Thames lapping at its edges. Holmes signaled to a small boat bobbing in. The shadows, its oarsman a wiry figure Watson, recognized as one of Holmes's irregulars, a street urchin named Wiggins. They piled in, the boat rocking wildly, as Wiggins rowed them into the fog dot safe for the moment. Holmes opened the box. Inside was a velvet pouch, but when he tipped it out, no sapphire emerged, only a glass replica, its blue dull and lifeless. Holmes's jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed with grim amusement. "A decoy," Watson said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "A clever one," Holmes replied, turning the glass in his hand. "But it tells us something vital. The order is cautious, and the real sapphire is still within reach. This box was meant to mislead, but the lavender scent betrays them. The true gem is likely still on the midnight gale, hidden elsewhere." Watson stared at the river, its surface a mirror for the fog's secrets. "What now?" Holmes tucked the box into his coat, his expression resolute. "We return to the ship, Watson. The game grows more intricate, but the serpent's trail is clear. Tomorrow night, we board the midnight gale. The sapphire awaits us." As the boat glided through the fog, Watson felt the weight of the chase settle into his bones. The cufflink's serpent, the lavender scent, the order's shadow, it all wove a tapestry of intrigue that Holmes alone could unravel. The night was far from over, and the sapphire's star burned brighter in their pursuit. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Lair. The fog clung to London's cobblestone streets like a shroud, muffling the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of night vendors. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved swiftly through the labyrinthine alleys of Whitechapel, their silhouettes flickering under the occasional gaslight. The cufflink, engraved with a coiled serpent, weighed heavily in Holmes's pocket, a tangible thread to the Order of the Saffron Veil, a secretive society whispered about in the city's underbelly. Its members, rumored to trade in stolen relics, and Forbidden's knowledge were as elusive as shadows. Yet the sapphire's theft, with its audacious precision, bore their mark. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the darkened storefronts, their faded signs barely legible in the gloom. "The serpent," he murmured, his voice low, is no mere ornament. It's a badge, Watson, a symbol of allegiance to a group that thrives in secrecy. We're close now, but we must tread lightly. The order is not known for welcoming uninvited guests. Watson, his overcoat damp from the mist, gripped his walking stick a little tighter. Close to what, exactly? A den of thieves? And how do you propose we find this order in a city teeming with secrets? Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. The cufflink's craftsmanship is distinctive Florentine silverwork, rare in London. Only one jeweler in this district could produce such a piece. Ezra Finch, a man with a reputation for discretion and dubious clients. His shop is our starting point. They turned down a narrow lane where the air grew thick with the scent of damp wood and coal smoke. Finch's shop, a squat building with a crooked sign reading Finch & Sons Jewelers, loomed at the end. Its windows were shuttered, but a faint glow seeped through the cracks, suggesting life within. Holmes paused, his gloved hand hovering over the door. "Listen," he whispered. A low murmur drifted from inside voices, clipped and urgent. Watson strained to hear, catching fragments of words. Sapphire, shipment, Calais. His pulse quickened. "They're discussing the Star Sapphire," he whispered. "We've found them." "Not yet," Holmes cautioned, his eyes narrowing. "We've found a thread. Now we must pull it without snapping it." He tested the door lock, as expected. With a deft movement, he produced a small pick from his coat and worked the lock with surgical precision. The mechanism yielded with a soft click, and they slipped inside. The shop's interior was a cluttered maze of glass cases and velvet-lined trays, glinting with gems and gold. A single oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, where two figures stood near a back door, their voices now clearer. One, a wiry man with a hooked nose, Ezra Finch, presumably gestured animatedly to a taller figure cloaked in a dark hood. "The order won't tolerate delays," the cloaked man hissed. "The Sapphire must be in Calais by week's end, or heads will roll." Holmes signaled Watson to stay low, and they crept behind a counter, close enough to hear every word. Finch's voice trembled. "I've done my part. The piece was delivered as promised. But the buyer's getting cold feet, says the heat from Scotland Yard is too much." "Then warm his feet," the cloaked man snapped. "Or the Vale will find someone who can." He turned toward the back door, revealing a glimpse of a saffron-colored sash beneath his cloak, a hallmark of the order. Holmes's eyes gleamed with predatory focus. "Watson," he whispered, "we need to follow that man. He's our bridge to the order's heart." Before Watson could respond, the back door creaked open, and the cloaked figure vanished into the night. Holmes was already moving, silent as a specter, with Watson close behind. The alley beyond was a warren of twists and turns, the fog swallowing their quarry's footsteps. But Holmes's senses were sharper than the mist. He paused at a corner, sniffing the air. "Lavender," he said softly. "The same scent from Ashbourne's estate. Our thief is near." They pressed on, the alley narrowing until it spilled into a derelict courtyard. At its center stood a crumbling stone archway, half hidden by ivy, leading to a basement door. The serpent emblem was carved into the lintel, its eyes glinting with inlaid amber. "The serpent's lair," Holmes murmured. "We've found their meeting house." Watson's stomach nodded. "And what's the plan? Waltz in and demand the sapphire?" Holmes's smile was grim. "Subtlety, Watson. We infiltrate, observe, and strike when the moment is right. Follow my lead." The door was unguarded, but locked with a complex mechanism. Holmes knelt, his tools dancing over the lock with the precision of a pianist. "A triple tumbler design," he muttered. "Clever, but not clever enough." The lock surrendered, and they descended a spiral staircase into darkness. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of wax and incense. At the bottom, a corridor stretched into shadow, lit by flickering sconces. Voices echoed from ahead, accompanied by the clink of glass and the rustle of paper. Holmes motioned for silence, and they crept toward a heavy curtain at the corridor's end. Beyond it lay a cavernous chamber, its walls draped in saffron silk, illuminated by a chandelier of black iron. A dozen figures, all wearing saffron sashes, gathered around a long table strewn with maps, ledgers, and glittering artifacts. At the table's head stood the cloaked man from the shop, now unhooded, revealing a gaunt face and piercing eyes. "The Star Sapphire is our crown jewel," he declared, his voice carrying a zealous edge. "Its sale will fund our expansion across the continent. But we must move swiftly. Holmes is sniffing too close." Watson's breath caught, but Holmes remained still, his gaze fixed on a leather-bound ledger on the table. "That book," he whispered, "holds their secrets. We need it." The chamber buzzed with activity as members debated logistics routes to Calais, a buyer's name, a ship called the Midnight Gale. Watson memorized every detail, his heart pounding. Then a floorboard creaked under his boot. The room fell silent. "Who's there?" A guard barked, drawing a blade. The saffron-clad figures turned, their eyes scanning the shadows. Holmes reacted instantly, pulling Watson behind a tapestry. "Stay calm," he hissed. "We're not discovered yet." But the guard approached, his blade gleaming. Watson's hand tightened on his stick, ready to fight, but Holmes's grip on his arm was firm. "Wait." The guard's boots stopped inches from their hiding place. "Must have been the wind," he muttered, turning back. But another voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the room. "Check the perimeter. No chances." Holmes's mind raced. They couldn't stay hidden long. The chamber was too well guarded. His eyes darted to a trapdoor in the corner, partially obscured by a rug. "Our exit," he whispered. They edged toward it, using the tapestry's cover, as the guards began a systematic search. The trapdoor was old, its hinges rusted, but Holmes pried it open with a knife, revealing a dark tunnel below. "Down," he ordered. Watson hesitated. Tunnels were not his forte, but the sound of approaching footsteps left no choice. They dropped into the passage, the trapdoor closing just as a guard's lantern swept the spot. The tunnel was narrow, its walls slick with damp. Holmes lit a small match, revealing a maze of passages branching into darkness. "Smugglers' routes," he said. "The Order's been using these for years." The air was thick with the stench of mildew, but Holmes moved with purpose, following. Faint scratches on the walls, marks of frequent use, out behind them. Shouts echoed as the Order realized their intrusion. "They're on to us," Watson panted, his limp flaring from the uneven ground. Holmes didn't slow, his mind mapping the labyrinth. "Keep moving. They won't risk a full chase in these tunnels. They're too valuable." The passage twisted, leading to a rusted grate overlooking the Thames. Moonlight glinted on the water below, and Holmes pushed the grate open, the metal groaning. They emerged into the night, the river's chill biting their skin. But the pursuit was close. Lanterns bobbed in the distance, voices growing louder. Holmes scanned the riverbank. A small rowboat bobbed against a crumbling pier. "There," he said, pulling Watson toward it. They clambered in, Holmes seizing the oars with practiced ease. The current was strong, but he rowed with relentless precision, steering them into the fog. The shouts faded, swallowed by the river's murmur. Watson's heart still raced. "That was too close, Holmes. We didn't get the sapphire." Holmes's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Not the sapphire, but something better. He reached into his coat and produced the leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with the serpent emblem. "I lifted it during the chaos. This will tell." "Use where the sapphire is going, and who's pulling the strings." Watson stared, incredulous. "You picked their pocket in the middle of that madness?" Holmes's smile was almost boyish. "A magician never reveals his tricks, Watson. But rest assured, this ledger is the key to the Order's plans. By dawn, we'll know their next move." As the boat drifted into the fog, the city's lights blurred into a haze. Watson leaned back, exhaustion mingling with awe. The Star Sapphire was still out there, but with Holmes at the helm, its recovery felt tantalizingly close. The ledger, heavy with secrets, promised answers, and a deeper plunge into the Order's shadowy world. The river carried them toward Baker Street, where the ciphered pages awaited Holmes's relentless mind. The game was afoot, and the serpent's lair had only sharpened its stakes. Chapter 5. The Codebreaker's Gambit. The fog that clung to Baker Street was thicker than usual that evening, a dense shroud that muffled the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of newsboys hawking their wares. Inside the familiar clutter of 221B, Sherlock Holmes sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a constellation of papers, books, and cryptic scribbles. The coded ledger, pilfered from the Order of the Saffron Vales meeting house, lay open before him, its pages a labyrinth of symbols that seemed to mock ordinary comprehension. Dr. John Watson, perched on the edge of an armchair, watched with a mixture of awe and impatience as Holmes's eyes darted across the pages, his long fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. "Holmes," Watson ventured, his voice tinged with concern, "you've been at this for hours. Surely a break would—" "No breaks, Watson," Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp but not unkind. "The sapphire is slipping further from us with every tick of the clock. This ledger holds the key, and I shall not rest until its secrets are mine." Watson sighed, adjusting his position to ease the ache in his leg, a lingering memento from his days in Afghanistan. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, but a chill seemed to emanate from the ledger itself, as if it carried the weight of the conspiracy it documented. Holmes's pipe lay abandoned on the table, its bowl cold, a rare sign of his singular focus. The detective's brow furrowed, and his lips moved silently, as though reciting an incantation to coax meaning from the chaos of symbols. The ledger was no ordinary document. Its leather cover was worn, but meticulously maintained, and the pages were filled with a bewildering array of glyph circles, bisected by jagged lines, triangles nested within spirals, and numbers that followed no discernible sequence. To Watson, it looked like the work of a mad mathematician, but Holmes saw something else entirely. A puzzle, a challenge, a map to the Star Sapphire's whereabouts. "Tell me, Watson," Holmes said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence, "what do you make of this?" He held up a page, pointing to a cluster of symbols that resembled a starburst with a single dot at its center. Watson leaned forward, squinting. "It's a drawing, perhaps? A star? Or some sort of alchemical nonsense?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Not nonsense, my dear Watson. Precision. This is a cipher, and a sophisticated one at that. The Order of the Saffron Veil has gone to great lengths to protect their secrets. But every lock has a key, and I intend to forge it." He returned to his work, muttering about Polybius squares and substitution ciphers. Watson, accustomed to Holmes's bouts of intense concentration, rose to pour himself a brandy from the decanter on the sideboard. As he sipped, he glanced at the ledger again, wondering what dark dealings it concealed. The Order, Holmes had explained, was no mere band of thieves, but a shadowy network that traded in artifacts of immense value, their motives obscured by layers of ritual and secrecy. The Star Sapphire, with its celestial hue and storied history, was precisely the sort of prize they would covet. Hours passed, marked only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional rustle of paper. Watson dozed fitfully in his chair, roused now and then by Holmes's sudden exclamations or the scratch of his pen. At last, just as the first hints of dawn began to pierce the fog outside, Holmes let out a triumphant cry. "Eureka, Watson!" he exclaimed, leaping to his feet with an energy that belied the sleepless night. "The cipher yields." Watson blinked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "You've cracked it? What does it say?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery. "It is a visionaire cipher, layered with a numerical shift to obscure the key. The symbols are a red herring, meant to distract from the underlying text. The key, fittingly, is saffron, a nod to the order's name. And the message." He paused, scanning the deciphered text he had scrawled on a sheet of foolscap. "It points to a ship, the Midnight Gale, docked at Wapping. It sails tomorrow night, bound for Calais, with the Star Sapphire in its hold." Watson's heart quickened. "A ship? Then the Sapphire is still in London?" "For now," Holmes replied, his tone grim. "But the order is meticulous. They will not leave such a treasure unguarded. The ledger mentions a named Captain Varkas, a smuggler of some repute. He is no mere courier. He is a linchpin in their operations." "Varkas," Watson repeated, committing the name to memory. "Do you know him?" "By reputation only," Holmes said, pacing the room. "A Greek by birth, he has made a fortune running contraband across the Channel. His ship is a floating fortress, crewed by men loyal to coin rather than country. If the Sapphire is aboard the Midnight Gale, retrieving it will be no small feat." Watson frowned, his practical mind turning to logistics. "How do we proceed? Storm the ship? Alert the authorities?" Holmes stopped pacing and fixed Watson with a look that was equal parts amusement and exasperation. "Storming a ship, Watson? How theatrical. No, we must be subtle. I shall board the Midnight Gale myself, disguised as a sailor. The docks at Wapping are a hive of activity. One more face will go unnoticed. You, my friend, will remain ashore, ready to act on my signal." "Disguised?" Watson's brow furrowed. "Holmes, this sounds perilously close to madness. If you're discovered, then I shall rely on my wits as always," Holmes interjected. "But I need you, Watson, to be my anchor. If I am to infiltrate the ship, I must know you are ready to summon assistance or follow if need be. Can I count on you?" Watson straightened, his soldier's instinct overriding his doubts. "Always, Holmes. You know that." Holmes nodded, a rare flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Good man. Now we have preparations to make. I must become someone else entirely by tomorrow night." The next day was a whirlwind of activity. Holmes, with his chameleon-like ability to transform, set about crafting his disguise. He rummaged through a battered trunk in the corner of the sitting room, pulling out a sailor's peacoat, a weathered cap, and a pair of boots so scuffed they seemed to carry the salt of a dozen seas. With a few deft touches of grease paint, he darkened his complexion and added a scar across his cheek, altering his features just enough to pass as a stranger. His violinist's hands were roughened with ash, and he practiced a rolling gait that spoke of years at sea. Watson watched the transformation with a mix of fascination and unease. "You look like you've just stepped off a whaler," he remarked. "But how will you explain your presence to the crew?" Holmes, now speaking in a gruff, accented voice, replied, "I'm Tom Carver, late of Bristol, looking for work. The docks are full of men like me, desperate for a berth. Varkas's crew won't question one more pair of hands, especially with a ship as large as the Midnight Gale. And if they do question you," Watson pressed. Holmes's eyes twinkled. "Then I shall improvise. Now, Watson, your role is critical. You'll wait at the Anchor and Crown, a tavern near the docks. If I signal 3 flashes of a lantern, from the ship's deck you'll fetch Inspector Lestrade and his men. but only if I signal. Understood?" Watson nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought of Holmes alone among cutthroats. "And how will you signal if you're in trouble?" Holmes patted his pocket, where a small mirror glinted. "A trick I learned from a signalman in the Navy. Light catches the eye, even in the dark." As evening fell, the two men set out for Wapping. The docks were a world unto themselves, a chaotic symphony of creaking ropes, shouting stevedores, and the briny tongue of the Thames. The midnight gale loomed at the far end of the quay, its black hull glistening under the gaslights. It was a schooner of considerable size, its masts piercing the fog like skeletal fingers. Watson felt a pang of dread as he watched Holmes, now fully Tom Carver, sling a duffel over his shoulder and stride toward the gangplank. "Godspeed, Holmes," Watson whispered, too low for his friend to hear. He turned and made his way to the Anchor and Crown, a ramshackle tavern that reeked of stale beer and tar. Settling into a corner booth, he ordered a pint and kept his eyes on the window, where the silhouette of the midnight gale was just visible through the haze. Inside the tavern, the air was thick with smoke and the hum of conversation. Sailors, dock workers, and less savory types filled the room, their voices a blend of Cockney, Scots, and foreign tongues. Watson nursed his drink, his thoughts racing. What if Holmes was discovered? What if the Sapphire wasn't even on the ship? The ledger had been their only lead, and while Holmes's confidence in its veracity was unshakable, Watson couldn't help but wonder if they were chasing Shadow's dot. As the hours dragged on, Watson's unease grew. The tavern's clock struck 10, then 11. No signal came from the ship. He began to imagine grim scenarios: Holmes unmasked, bound or worse, tossed into the Thames with weights at his feet. He shook his head, trying to dispel the images. Holmes had faced worse odds and emerged unscathed. Surely this would be no different. Just past midnight, a commotion at the tavern's door drew Watson's attention. A man staggered in, his face bloodied, his sailor's jacket torn. He was shouting something about a fight on the docks, a crewman attacked by a stranger. Watson's heart sank. Could it be Holmes? He rose, ready to investigate, when a flicker of light caught his eye. Triple flash from the direction of the midnight gale. Relief and urgency surged through him. Holmes was alive, and the signal meant action. Watson slipped out of the tavern, his limp barely slowing him as he hurried toward the police station where Lestrade could be found at this hour. The fog was thicker now, swallowing the gaslights and turning the docks into a maze of shadows. As he moved, Watson's mind raced with questions. Had Holmes found the Sapphire? Was Vargas onto him? And what of the Order's larger plans? Back at Baker Street, the ledger still lay open, its deciphered message a beacon in the darkness. The midnight gale, Calais, Vargas. The words echoed in Watson's mind, a reminder of the stakes. The Star Sapphire was more than a gem. It was a symbol of the Order's reach, their audacity, their greed. And Holmes, with his relentless pursuit of truth, was their greatest threat. As Watson reached the police station, he cast one last glance toward the river, where the midnight gale waited like a predator in the mist. The game was afoot, and the next move was Holmes's. Watson could only hope his friend's gambit would pay off, bringing them one step closer to the Sapphire and to unraveling the secrets of the Order of the Saffron Veil. The fog thickened. As Watson pushed through the station's doors, his breath catching in his throat, he had no time to lose. Lestrade, bleary-eyed but alert, listened as Watson relayed the situation in clipped, urgent tones. The inspector, though often exasperated by Holmes's methods, knew better than to dismiss him outright. Within minutes, a small contingent of constables was assembled, their truncheons at the ready. As they marched back toward the docks, Watson's thoughts returned to Holmes. The detective's plan was audacious, even by his standards. Disguised. As a sailor, he was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. One wrong step, one misplaced word, and he could be lost. Yet Watson knew Holmes thrived on such risks, his mind sharpened by the thrill of danger. The Anchor and Crown came into view, its windows glowing faintly through the fog. Watson scanned the key, searching for another signal, but the night was. Still, the midnight gale remained at its berth, its deck quiet save for the occasional shout of a crewman. Watson's grip tightened on his cane, his old service revolver a reassuring weight in his pocket. Whatever awaited them aboard that ship, he would be ready. The chapter closed with Watson standing at the edge of the docks, the constables at his back, their eyes fixed on the dark shape of the midnight gale. The Sapphire was so close, yet the path to it was fraught with peril. Holmes's message, decoded from the ledger's cryptic symbols, had set them on this course, and now the game depended on his next move. The fog swirled, the river lapped at the pilings, and Watson waited, his heart pounding with the certainty that the night was far from over. Chapter 6. Aboard the midnight gale, the night was a shroud of ink, the Thames a ribbon of black glass under a moonless sky. Sherlock Holmes, his sharp features obscured by the coarse stubble of a sailor's beard and a battered cap pulled low, moved with the quiet assurance of a man who belonged among the creaking timbers and salt-stained ropes of the midnight gale. The ship, a weathered brigantine moored at a secluded dock in London's East End, swayed gently against the tide, masts groaning like ancient sentinels. Holmes had donned the guise of a deckhand rough woolen jacket, patched trousers, and boots that bore the scuffs of a dozen imaginary voyages, to infiltrate the crew and uncover the fate of the stolen Star Sapphire Dr. John Watson, left ashore. With strict instructions to wait for Holmes's signal, paced the fog-draped wharf, his breath clouding in the chill air. His revolver, a reassuring weight in his coat pocket, did little to ease the knot of unease in his chest. Holmes's plan was bold, as always, but the risks were palpable. The ship was a den of smugglers. Its captain, Vargas, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness preceded him like a storm. Watson glanced at the distant silhouette of the midnight gale, its lanterns casting feeble pools of light across the deck, and muttered to himself, "If he gets himself killed, I'll never forgive him." Aboard the ship, Holmes moved with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to blending into shadows. The crew, a motley assembly of weathered sailors and sharp-eyed rogues, paid him little mind as he hauled a coil of rope across the deck, his eyes scanning every detail. The air was thick with the tongue of tar and brine, overlaid with a faint, incongruous sweetness lavender, perhaps lingering from the theft at Lord Ashburn's estate. Holmes's mind catalogued the scent, filing it alongside the smudged footprint and the serpent-engraved cufflink from earlier clues. Each was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, and he was determined to weave them together. The deck was alive with activity, though the hour was late. Sailors scrubbed planks, checked rigging, and exchanged low, guarded words. Holmes, under the alias of Jack Tarley, had secured his place among them with a forged letter of recommendation and a convincing tale of a hard-luck life at sea. His hands, calloused from years of violin strings rather than ropes, mimicked the motions of a seasoned sailor as he tied knots and hauled crates, all while his eyes darted to the captain's cabin at the stern. If the Star Sapphire was aboard, it would be there or in some hidden hold below. "Oi, Tarley," barked a burly mate with a scar snaking across his jaw. "Quit daydreamin' and get that crate stowed afore the tide turns." Holmes nodded, his voice a low growl to match his disguise. Aye, mate." He hefted the crate, feeling its weight shift unevenly too light for its size, suggesting a false bottom or hidden compartment. His pulse quickened, but he kept his expression blank, storing the observation for later As he worked, Holmes overheard snatches of conversation. Among the crew, a wiry sailor with a missing ear muttered about the Star and Calais, confirming the ledger's decoded message. Another, a gaunt man with a tattoo of a kraken curling up his arm, spoke of the captain's buyer and a fat purse. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. The trail was warmed out below deck. The air grew stifling, the scent of mildew, and unwashed bodies mingling with the creak of the ship's timbers. Holmes slipped away from his assigned tasks, citing a need to fetch more rope from the hold. The narrow passageway was dimly lit by flickering lanterns, casting shadows that danced like specters. He moved silently, his boots barely whispering against the warped boards, until he reached a locked door marked with a crude chalk symbol, a circle bisected by a wavy line. The mark of the Order of the Saffron Veil, subtle but unmistakable too. His trained eye, Holmes knelt, producing a set of lockpicks from a hidden pocket in his jacket. The lock was old but sturdy, its tumblers resisting his probing. He worked with the precision of a surgeon, his breath steady until a soft click rewarded his efforts. The door swung open, revealing a cramped compartment lined with crates and barrels. A single lantern hung from a beam, casting a sickly yellow glow. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The crates were unmarked, but one, tucked in a corner, bore the same lavender scent he'd noted at the crime scene. He pried it open with a small crowbar from his toolkit, revealing a false bottom. Beneath it lay a velvet pouch, its weight promising something precious. Holmes's fingers brushed the fabric, but before he could open it, a shadow loomed in the doorway. "Who's there?" growled a voice, thick with suspicion. It was the scarred mate from earlier, his hand resting on a cutlass at his belt. Holmes spun, adopting a sheepish grin. "Just checking the stores, mate. Captain's orders make sure nothing's amiss afore we sail." The mate's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking to the open crate. "Captain didn't say nothin' about that." "You're new, ain't you, Tarley?" "Fresh as a spring tide," Holmes replied, his tone light but his mind racing. The mate's stance suggested he was seconds from drawing his blade. Holmes's hand hovered near the knife concealed in his boot, but he opted for misdirection. "Heard a rat scurrying in here. Didn't want it chewing through our supplies." The mate hesitated, then snorted. "Rats, eh? Better not be poking where you don't belong. Get back to the deck now." Holmes nodded, slipping past, the mate with a deferential bob of his head. The pouch remained in the crate, but he'd confirmed its presence. The Sapphire, or something meant to pass for it, was aboard. He needed to signal Watson and devise a plan to secure the gem before the ship reached Calais. Back on deck, Holmes scanned the shore, where Watson's silhouette was barely visible through the fog. He lit a small lantern, swinging it in a deliberate pattern, 3 short flashes, a pause, then 2 long ones. Watson, ever vigilant, would recognize the signal to follow the ship from a discreet distance, likely by hiring a small boat to trail them along the coast dot as the crew prepared to cast off. Holmes overheard Captain Vargas himself, a bear of a man with a voice like gravel, barking orders from the quarterdeck. "We sail with the tide, lads. Calais by dawn, and a fortune waiting for us." His eyes, cold and calculating, swept the deck, lingering on Holmes for a fraction too long. Holmes ducked his head, busying himself with a coil of rope, but his heart thudded. Vargas was no fool. A single misstep could unravel everything. The ship lurched as it slipped its moorings, the Thames carrying it toward the open sea. Holmes worked alongside the crew, his mind a whirl of calculations. The Sapphire was likely in the crate he'd found, but Vargas's mention of a fortune suggested a larger scheme. Was the gem the sole prize, or part of a broader haul? The Order of the Saffron Veil's involvement hinted at deeper machinations, and Holmes was determined to unravel them in the small hours. With the ship slicing through the dark waters, Holmes seized a moment to slip below again. The mate was distracted, arguing with a sailor over a botched knot. Holmes returned to the locked compartment, picking the lock with practiced ease. The pouch was still there, undisturbed. He opened it, revealing a gem that gleamed like a fragment of the night sky blue, radiant and unmistakably the Star Sapphire. Or was it? Holmes's eyes narrowed as he held it to the lantern's light, noting a faint irregularity in its facets. A masterful fake, perhaps, or the real gem with a flaw he'd overlooked. He tucked the pouch back into the crate, deciding to bide his time. If Vargas was carrying a decoy, the real sapphire might be elsewhere, perhaps on his person. As Holmes emerged from the hold, a shout rang out. Intruder! The scarred mate stood at the top of the stairs, his cutlass drawn, eyes blazing. Holmes cursed inwardly. He'd been too slow. The crew converged, blocking his path to the deck. Vargas himself appeared, his bulk filling the passageway, a pistol glinting in his hand. Who are you? Really? Vargas growled, his voice low and dangerous. No sailor I ever met moves like you, skulking about my ship. Holmes's mind raced, but his face remained a mask of calm. Jack Tarley, sir. Just doing my job, checking the hold like you said. Liar, Vargas spat. You're no more a sailor than I'm a bishop. Search him. The mate patted Holmes down, finding the lockpicks and knife. Vargas's eyes gleamed with triumph. A thief, eh? Or something worse. Lock him in the brig. We'll deal with him in Calais. Holmes, hands raised, let himself be led to the brig, a cramped cell below the waterline. The door slammed shut, the lock clicking with finality. Alone in the dark, he allowed himself a faint smile. The crew's suspicion was a setback, but not a defeat. He'd seen the gem, confirmed Vargas's destination, and signaled Watson. The game was still afoot. In the brig, Holmes examined his surroundings. The cell was a cage of iron and wood, the air damp and heavy. A single porthole, too small to crawl through, offered a glimpse of the churning sea. He tested the bars, finding them solid but rusted at the joints. With time, he could weaken them, but time was a luxury he lacked. The ship would reach Calais in hours, and the sapphire might vanish into the hands of Vargas's buyer. Holmes's thoughts turned to Watson, who, if all went well, was trailing the ship. He pictured his friend's determined face, the loyal doctor ready to plunge into danger at a moment's notice. Watson would need to act swiftly once they reached port, but Holmes had one more card to play. From a seam in his jacket, he produced a small vial of acid, a precaution he'd carried for just such an occasion. He applied it to the lock, the metal hissing faintly as it corroded. As the ship neared Calais, the lock gave way with a soft snap. Holmes slipped out, moving like a wraith through the ship's bowels. He needed to reach the deck and signal Watson again. But first, he returned to the compartment. The pouch was gone. Vargas, or someone else, had moved it. Holmes's jaw tightened, but he pressed on, climbing to the deck under cover of darkness. Crew was preoccupied with docking preparations, their shouts mingling with the cries of gulls. Holmes crept to the rail, lighting his lantern and flashing the signal once more. 3 short, 2 long. In the distance, a small boat bobbed, its occupant a familiar figure in a greatcoat. Watson was there, ready to act. Holmes's heart lifted, but danger loomed. Vargas's voice boomed across the deck, ordering the crew to prepare for the buyer's arrival. The sapphire, real or fake, was still in play, and Holmes was determined to seize it. As the ship docked, he melted into the shadows, ready to follow Vargas into Calais and unravel the next thread of the mystery. The chapter closed with Holmes poised at the edge of the deck, the lights of Calais twinkling like stars on the horizon. The sapphire was within reach, but the game had grown more perilous. Watson, watching from his boat, gripped his revolver, ready to join the chase. The night promised danger, but also answers, and Holmes was ready to meet both head-on. Chapter 7. The Calais Connection. The briny tang of the English Channel clung to the air as the steamer Midnight Gale sliced through the dark waves toward Calais. The night was thick, with a mist that seemed to swallow sound itself, leaving only the rhythmic churn of the ship's engines and the occasional cry of a gull lost in the fog. Sherlock Holmes, clad in the rough garb of a deckhand, moved silently along the deck, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowed corners where the crew loitered. His disguise a coarse woolen cap pulled low, a salt-stained jacket, and a scarf wound tight against the chill was impeccable, transforming the lean detective into just another weathered sailor. Yet beneath the guise, his mind hummed with precision, piecing together the threads of the Star Sapphire's trail. Dr. John Watson, waiting ashore in Calais, paced the cobbled quay, his breath puffing in the cold. He clutched a small notebook, jotting observations to steady his nerves. The docks were a labyrinth of crates and barrels, their damp surfaces gleaming under flickering gaslights. Sailors and dockhands bustled about, their voices a medley of French, English, and languages Watson couldn't place. His role was clear. Watch for Captain Varkas, the smuggler Holmes had linked to the Sapphire's theft, and track his movements once the Midnight Gale docked. But the weight gnawed at him, each passing minute stretching his patience thinner than the fog. Holmes had signaled from the ship just before dawn, a brief flash of a lantern, 3 quick pulses, confirming he'd found a lead. Watson had glimpsed it from his vantage point, a surge of relief cutting through his anxiety. Now, as the ship's silhouette loomed closer, its prow cutting through the mist, Watson's pulse quickened. He tucked the notebook into his coat and adjusted his hat, blending into the crowd of porters and merchants awaiting the vessel. Aboard the Midnight Gale, Holmes crouched behind a stack of crates near the crew's quarters, his ears attuned to the low murmur of voices within. Captain Varkas, a wiry man with a scar snaking down his cheek, was speaking to a mate in hushed tones. Holmes caught fragments. ... Calais by midnight. Madame Dubois ... No mistakes. The name struck a chord. Madame Dubois, a French aristocrat with a reputation for acquiring rare treasures, was no stranger to London's gossip columns. Her involvement suggested the Sapphire's trail was veering into dangerous waters. Holmes's fingers brushed, the forged letter in his pocket, a masterpiece of deception he'd crafted during the voyage. Written in Varkas's own clipped style, it hinted at a betrayal by one of his crew, designed to sow distrust between the captain and his buyer. The plan was risky, but Holmes thrived on such gambits. He needed chaos to flush the Sapphire into the open, and Madame Dubois's temper, rumored to be as volatile as a storm, was the perfect catalyst. The ship docked with a groan of timber, and Holmes slipped below deck, avoiding the crew's bustle. He'd already searched the hidden compartment he'd found the previous night, cleverly concealed panel in the captain's cabin, but it held only decoy jewels, glass baubles meant to mislead. The real sapphire, he suspected, was on Varkas's person, a precaution the smuggler wouldn't abandon lightly. Holmes's task now was to ensure the captain carried it to the rendezvous. On the quay, Watson spotted Varkas descending the gangplank, a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. The captain's eyes darted about, wary as a fox, and Watson ducked behind a barrel, his heart pounding. Varkas moved swiftly, weaving through the crowd toward a narrow street lined with taverns and warehouses. Watson followed at a distance, his military training keeping his steps silent despite the uneven cobbles. The fog thickened, curling around, lampposts like ghostly fingers, and Watson cursed under his breath as Varkas's figure blurred. The smuggler, entered Le Corbeau Noir, a tavern whose sign, a raven with glinting eyes, swung creakily in the wind. Watson hesitated, then slipped inside, the door creaking just enough to draw a glance from a grizzled bartender. The interior was dim, heavy with the scent of ale and tobacco. Rough-hewn tables were crowded with sailors, their laughter and curses blending into a raucous din. Watson took a seat near the back, ordering a pint to blend in, his eyes fixed on Vargas, who sat alone in a corner, his satchel guarded beneath one arm. Holmes, meanwhile, had trailed Vargas from the ship, his disguise, allowing him to pass unnoticed. He entered the tavern moments after Watson, spotting his friend's familiar silhouette. A faint nod passed between them, imperceptible to others. Holmes took a stool at the bar, his back to Vargas, but his senses alert. The forged letter was already in play. He'd slipped it into the satchel during a staged stumble on the dock. A sleight of hand perfected years ago. Now he waited for Madame Dubois. She arrived like a gust of winter wind, her entrance silencing the tavern for a heartbeat. Madame Celeste Dubois was a vision of elegance, her auburn hair swept beneath a velvet hat, her gown a deep emerald that caught the lamplight. But her eyes, sharp as cut glass, betrayed a predator's focus. She scanned the room, then glided toward Vargas's table, her silk gloves clutching a small purse. Holmes tilted his head, catching her reflection in a tarnished mirror behind. The bar, Watson, too, watched, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Captain," Madame Dubois said, her voice low but carrying an edge of command. She sat across from Vargas, her posture rigid. "You have it?" Vargas's scar twitched as he leaned forward. "Aye, madame." "But the price doubled, as we agreed." Her lips thinned. "Doubled? You test my patience, Vargas." "The order doesn't." "Tolerate greed." Holmes's pulse quickened at the mention of the Order of the Saffron Veil. His suspicions were correct. This was no simple theft, but a cog in a larger machine. He sipped his ale, his ears straining to catch every word. Vargas slid the satchel onto the table, his fingers lingering on the clasp. "Check it yourself, then, but I'll have the coin first." Madame Dubois's eyes narrowed, and she reached into her purse, producing a folded paper instead of coins. "This arrived this morning," she said, her tone icy. "Care to explain?" Vargas frowned, unfolding the paper Holmes's forged letter. His face darkened as he read, the words accusing a crewman of plotting to steal the sapphire for a rival buyer. "This is a lie," he growled, slamming the paper down. "Who sent this?" "Madame." Dubois leaned closer, her voice a hiss. "You tell me, Captain. If your men are disloyal, the sapphire's safety is in question. The Order does not deal with amateurs." Watson, catching the rising tension, shifted in his seat, ready to act. Holmes remained still, his mind racing. The letter was working distrust, was fracturing their alliance. But he needed more. He needed the sapphire in the open. Vargas's hand darted to his satchel, pulling it open to reveal a velvet pouch. "See for yourself," he snapped, tossing it to her. "The star's here." Madame Dubois caught the pouch, her fingers deft as she loosened the drawstring. A glint of celestial blue spilled into her palm, the Star Sapphire, its facets catching the tavern's dim light like a captured galaxy. Watson's breath caught, and even Holmes, ever composed, felt a thrill. There it was, the prize they'd chased across London and the Channel, but the moment shattered. A burly man at a nearby table, a sailor with a tattooed neck lurch to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "Vargas, you double-crossing cur?" he roared, his accent thick with the docks of Liverpool. "That gem's mine by rights." The tavern erupted. Glasses shattered as men leapt up, some drawing knives, others shouting. Vargas sprang back, clutching his satchel, while Madame Dubois tucked the sapphire into her purse with startling calm. Watson rose, his hand on the revolver in his coat, but Holmes's sharp glance signaled restraint. The chaos was their ally. Tattooed sailor lunged at Vargas, who dodged, swinging a fist that connected with a sickening crunch. Madame Dubois seized the moment, slipping toward the door, but Holmes was faster. He moved through the brawl like a shadow, his sailor's guise blending with the melee. As Madame Dubois reached the exit, he brushed past her, his fingers slipping the forged letter from her purse and replacing it with a blank one of a decoy to keep her guessing. Outside, the fog swallowed her figure, but Holmes caught a glimpse of the sapphire's pouch in her hand as she vanished into an alley. Vargas, now grappling with two sailors, hadn't noticed her exit. Watson pushed through the crowd, reaching Holmes's side. "She's got it," he whispered urgently. Holmes nodded, his eyes alight. "Let her run. She'll lead us to the next link." They slipped out, the tavern's chaos fading behind them. The alley was a maze of crates and shadows, but Holmes's senses were home to a razor's edge. He followed the faint click of Madame Dubois's heels, Watson close behind. The trail led to a warehouse, its iron door ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of tar. Lanterns cast flickering pools of light, revealing crates stamped with foreign-marked smugglers' goods. No doubt. Holmes motioned Watson to the side, his finger to his lips. They crouched behind a stack of barrels, watching as Madame Dubois met a new figure, a man in a tailored coat, his face obscured by a hat's brim. "The sapphire," he said, his voice smooth but commanding. "Now," Madame Dubois hesitated, her hand hovering over her purse. "The order promised me a cut. Monsieur, where's my assurance?" The man chuckled, a sound like dry leaves. "You'll have it when the collector sees the gem. No sooner." Holmes's eyes narrowed. The collector, a name that had surfaced in the ledger, a shadow behind the order schemes. This was no mere buyer, but the architect of the theft. Watson's grip tightened on his revolver, but Holmes's hand on his arm stayed him. They needed more than a glimpse. They needed the sapphire and the collector's identity. Madame Dubois handed over the pouch, and the man inspected the gem, holding it to a lantern. Its blue fire danced, mesmerizing. "Exquisite," he murmured. "The collector will be pleased." Holmes chose his moment. He stepped from the shadows, his sailor's cap discarded, his voice cutting through the silence. "A pity the collector won't see it tonight." Madame Dubois gasped, and the man whirled, drawing a pistol. But Holmes was ready, a throwing knife flashing from his sleeve, pinning the man's coat to a crate. The pistol clattered to the floor. Watson leapt forward, tackling the man before he could recover. Madame Dubois, seizing her chance, bolted for the door, the sapphire still in her grasp. "Let her go," Holmes said, his voice calm but firm. He knelt beside the man, now subdued, and retrieved the pouch from where it had fallen. Opening it, he held the gem to the light, his expression unreadable. Watson, panting, secured the man's wrists with a cord from his pocket. "Is it the real one?" he asked. Holmes's lips curved faintly. "We'll know soon enough. But first, we have a new player to question." The man glared, his face still shadowed, but Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. The fog outside thickened, and the night stretched on, the Star Sapphire's fate hanging in the balance. The story continues with Holmes and Watson interrogating their captive, unraveling the collector's shadow, and pursuing Madame Dubois, whose flight promises to lead them deeper into the order's web. The sapphire, so close, remains a tantalizing prize in a game of wits and deception. Chapter 8. The double-cross, briny air of Calais clung to Sherlock Holmes's coat as he crouched behind a stack of barrels outside the tavern. La Poisson d'Or. The night was thick with a fog that swirled like ghostly tendrils, muffling the clatter of hooves on cobblestone and the distant cry of a gull. Inside, through a grimy window, the dim glow of oil lamps illuminated a scene of tense negotiation. Captain Varkas, his weathered face half hidden by a tricorn hat, leaned across a scarred wooden table, his voice a low growl as he spoke to Madame Dubois. Her sharp eyes glinted, her posture regal yet predatory, like a falcon sizing up its prey. The Star Sapphire, that celestial blue gem, was the unspoken heart of their exchange, and Holmes knew it was close, perhaps too close. Dr. John Watson, positioned across the alley behind a rusted anchor, clutched his revolver, his breath shallow in the damp chill. Holmes had insisted on stealth, but Watson's pulse quickened at the thought of the sapphire slipping through their fingers again. The tavern's door creaked open, spilling raucous laughter and the scent of stale ale into the night. A burly sailor stumbled out, oblivious to the two men hidden in the shadows. Holmes's eyes, sharp as a blade, never left the window. "Varkas is growing restless," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible over the soft lap of waves against the nearby docks. "Madame Dubois is too composed. She's playing him." Watson squinted, trying to read the scene through the fogged glass. "How can you tell? They're just talking." Holmes's lips twitched, a faint smirk. "Observe her hands, Watson. She's toying with that silver locket at her throat, a nervous gesture, but deliberate. She's keeping him off balance, buying time. Varkas, on the other hand, keeps glancing at the door. He expects trouble, or he's planning to bolt." Watson nodded, though his mind raced to keep up with Holmes's deductions. The plan had been audacious. Holmes, still disguised as a weathered sailor from the midnight gale, had slipped a forged letter into Madame Dubois's possession earlier that evening. The letter, penned in Varkas's scrawl, thanks to Holmes's uncanny knack for mimicry, suggested the smuggler was double-crossing her, planning to sell the sapphire to another buyer. The seed of distrust was sown, and now Holmes waited for it to bloom into chaos. Inside, Madame Dubois's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You think me a fool, Varkas? I know of your little meeting in Boulogne. Who is this other buyer you've been whispering to?" Varkas slammed a fist on the table, rattling the tankards. "Lies. I've no other buyer. The sapphire's yours, as agreed, once I see the gold." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Perfect," he murmured. "She's taken the bait. Now, Watson, watch closely. The game is about to shift." The tavern door burst open again, this time with purpose. Two men, cloaked in dark overcoats, strode in, their movements precise, almost military. Watson tensed, his grip tightening on the revolver. "Holmes, who are they?" "Enforcers," Holmes replied, his tone clipped. "Likely Madame Dubois's men, here to ensure her interests. Or perhaps they're with the Order of the Saffron Veil, tying up loose ends. Either way, their arrival is our opportunity." Holmes's plan was unfolding, but not without risk. The forged letter was only the first move in a delicate gambit. He had also planted a rumor among the tavern's less savory patrons, through a barmaid, that Varkas was wanted by the French authorities for smuggling contraband beyond the sapphire. The rumor was designed to spark a confrontation, forcing Varkas to act rashly. Holmes's goal was clear: get close enough to confirm the sapphire's location, and if possible, retrieve it before the deal concluded. Inside, the atmosphere thickened. Madame Dubois stood, her silk dress rustling as she leaned toward Varkas, her voice a venomous hiss. "You dare play games with me? I have eyes everywhere, Captain. Alone, was it? Or perhaps you've already sold the gem and thought to swindle me with a fake?" Varkas's face reddened, his hand twitching toward the dagger at his belt. "You question my honor?" I've risked my neck to get that stone here. Show me the gold, or this ends now." The two enforcers stepped closer, their hands resting on concealed weapons. The tavern's other patrons, sailors, merchants, and above the few local rogues sensed the rising tension and began to edge toward the walls. A brawl was brewing, and Holmes's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Now, Watson," he whispered, "we move." Before Watson could protest, Holmes slipped from behind the barrels, his sailor's guise tattered coat, salt-stained cap making him indistinguishable from the dockside rabble. He approached the tavern door, feigning a drunken stagger, and pushed inside. Watson, heart pounding, followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. The interior of the poisoned door was a haze of smoke and flickering light. The air reeked of sweat, ale, and cheap tobacco. Holmes wove through the crowd, his movements fluid, until he was within earshot of Vargas's table. Watson hovered near the bar, his hand still on his revolver, praying Holmes's plan wouldn't end in a knife fight. Madame Dubois's voice cut through the din. "Enough, Vargas. Show me the sapphire, or my men will ensure you never leave this tavern." Vargas, his jaw tight, reached into his satchel and produced a small velvet pouch. The room seemed to hold its breath as he tipped the contents onto the table. A gem gleamed in the lamplight, its deep blue facets catching the glow like a captured star. Watson's heart leapt. Was it the Star Sapphire? But Holmes's earlier words echoed in his mind. "The thief is clever, Watson. A fake is always a possibility." Madame Dubois's eyes narrowed as she lifted the gem, turning it in her gloved fingers. "This is it? The Star Sapphire?" Her tone was skeptical, almost mocking. "It's the real thing," Vargas growled. "Test it if you doubt me." Holmes, now leaning against a nearby pillar, caught Watson's eye and gave a subtle nod. The moment was approaching. Watson's gaze flicked to the enforcers, who were watching Vargas like hawks. The tavern's other patrons, sensing the mounting danger, began to murmur and shift uneasily. Then, as if on cue, the barmaid, a wiry woman with a sharp tongue, slammed a tray down at a nearby table and shouted, "Vargas, you dog! The gendarmes are coming for you. I heard it myself, smuggling charges and worse." The effect was immediate. The tavern erupted into chaos. Patrons scrambled for the exits, knocking over chairs and spilling drinks. Vargas shot to his feet, his dagger drawn, his eyes darting wildly. "Who said that? Who's spreading lies?" Madame Dubois, unfazed, slipped the gem back into the pouch and tucked it into her reticule. "It seems, Captain, your time is short. My offer stands gold for the sapphire, but I'll not deal with a hunted man." The enforcers moved to flank her, their hands now openly on their weapons. Vargas, cornered, roared in frustration and lunged toward the door, only to be blocked by a group of sailors who, fueled by the rumor, saw a chance to curry favor with the authorities. A brawl broke out, fists flying and bottles shattering. Holmes seized the moment. He slipped through the melee, his movements a blur, and reached Madame Dubois's side. With the deftness of a pickpocket, he swapped her reticule with an identical one he'd prepared earlier, a trick learned from a Whitechapel thief years ago. The switch was flawless, unnoticed in the chaos. Holmes melted back into the crowd, signaling Watson to follow. Outside, in the fog-choked alley, Holmes opened the stolen reticule. Inside was the velvet pouch, and within it, the gem. He held it. To the faint light of a street lamp, his expression unreadable. "Is it the Star Sapphire?" Watson asked, his voice tight with hope. Holmes's brow furrowed. He turned the gem, inspecting its facets with a jeweler's precision. Then, with a soft curse, he shook his head. "A fake. A masterful one, but a fake nonetheless. The cut is too perfect, the clarity too uniform. The real Star Sapphire has a faint inclusion, a star-shaped flaw visible only under scrutiny. Watson's shoulders slumped. Then where's the real one? Holmes's eyes gleamed with a mix of frustration and excitement. Vargas never had it. Or if he did, he's already passed it to another. This was a decoy, meant to appease Madame Dubois or to throw us off the scent. Watson stared, incredulous. But you saw it in his satchel. You were certain. I was certain he had a gem, Holmes corrected. The question is, who has the real one? Madame Dubois suspected a double cross, but she may not know she's holding a forgery. Or perhaps she does, and she's part of a deeper game. The sound of shouts and breaking glass echoed from the tavern. Holmes tucked the fake gem into his pocket and pulled his cap lower. Come, Watson. We've stirred the hornet's nest. Let's see where the wasps fly. They retreated deeper into the alley, the fog swallowing their footsteps. Holmes's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. The fake sapphire was a twist he hadn't anticipated, but it only sharpened his resolve. The real gem was still out there, and with it, the truth. As they moved through the mist, Holmes's thoughts turned to Madame Dubois's words. The collector. She'd mentioned a mysterious figure, someone pulling strings from the shadows. The Order of the Saffron Veil was involved, of that Holmes was certain. But the collector was a new player, a phantom, who held the key to the sapphire's fate. Back at their rented lodgings in Calais, a cramped room above a baker's shop, Holmes spread his notes across a rickety table. Watson, nursing a bruised knuckle from the tavern scuffle, watched as Holmes sketched a diagram of the players: Vargas, Madame Dubois, the Order, and the elusive collector. The fake sapphire is a distraction, Holmes said, his voice low but intense. Vargas is a pawn, Madame Dubois a knight, but the collector is the king. We must find him before the real sapphire leaves Calais. Watson frowned. And how do we do that? We've no leads, no name, nothing but a fake gem and a brawl behind. U.S. Holmes's smile was thin but resolute. Not nothing, Watson. We have the fake gem itself. Its craftsmanship is exquisite, too exquisite for a common forger. It was made by someone with access to rare materials and expert skill. There are only a handful of jewelers in Europe capable of such work. He pulled a small notebook from his coat and flipped to a page of names. Tomorrow we visit Monsieur Lefebvre, a jeweler in Calais known for his discretion. If he didn't craft this fake, he'll know who did. And that, Watson, will lead us to the collector. Watson leaned back, exhaustion warring with admiration. You planned for this, didn't you? Even the fake? Holmes's eyes twinkled. I planned for chaos, Watson. The fake is merely a bonus. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we hunt. As Watson settled onto the lumpy cot, his mind replayed the night's events, the fog, the brawl, the glint of the fake sapphire. The trail was growing colder, yet Holmes's confidence was unshaken. The Star Sapphire was still out there, and with it, a web of deceit that Holmes was determined to unravel. The night deepened, and the fog outside thickened, as if guarding the secrets of Calais. Somewhere, the real sapphire waited, its blue heart pulsing in the hands of a master schemer. Holmes, staring into the darkness, knew the game was far from over. Chapter 9. The collector's shadow, the fog, clung to London's cobblestones like a conspirator, veiling the city's secrets as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped from their hansom cab. The trail of the stolen Star Sapphire had led them to a dilapidated manor on the outskirts of Blackheath, its silhouette looming against the bruised twilight sky. The air was heavy with damp earth and the faint tang of coal smoke, a fitting shroud for the mystery they pursued. Holmes's sharp eyes scanned the manor's crumbling facade, ivy-choked walls, broken shutters, and a single lit window flickering like a conspiratorial wink. The collector, the elusive mastermind behind the Sapphire's theft, was rumored to reside here, and Holmes was determined to unmask him. "Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low as he adjusted his scarf against the chill. "This place is no mere hideout. It's a vault of secrets, and I suspect our quarry guards more than just the sapphire within." Watson, clutching his service revolver beneath his coat, nodded grimly. "A man who commands the Order of the Saffron Veil doesn't strike me as one for modest lodgings, but this manor looks abandoned. Are you certain we're in the right place?" Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Abandonment is often a disguise, my dear Watson. Observe the window-clean glass amidst decay. Someone tends this ruin with care. We are precisely where we need to be." They approached the manor's iron gate, its hinges rusted but oiled, betraying recent use. Holmes's gloved fingers traced the lock, finding it unlatched, a careless invitation or a deliberate trap. He pushed it open. The creak swallowed by. The fog. The path to the manor was overgrown, yet a faint trail of flattened grass suggested recent passage. Holmes crouched, examining the ground with his magnifying glass, his movements precise as a predator's. Fresh boot prints, he noted, and not just one pair. At least 3 distinct treads, one with a peculiar limp. "Our collector entertains company." Watson's brow furrowed. "A meeting or guards?" "Both, I suspect," Holmes replied, rising. "Stay close, Watson. The game is afoot, and the stakes are high." They slipped through the shadows, skirting the manor's perimeter, to avoid detection. The lit window beckoned, its glow casting eerie shapes on the lawn. Holmes led them to a side entrance, a warped door half hidden by brambles. With a deft twist of his lockpick, the door yielded, revealing a darkened hallway thick with the scent of mildew and wax. The faint hum of voices drifted from deeper within, punctuated by the clink of glass. Holmes motioned for silence, his eyes gleaming with focus. They crept forward, the floorboards groaning softly underfoot. The hallway opened into a grand atrium, its former splendor marred by cobwebs and dust. A chandelier hung lopsided, its crystals dulled, yet the voices grew clearer, emanating from a door ajar at the far end. Holmes paused, ear tilted, deciphering the muffled words. The sapphire must be secured before the exchange." A deep voice intoned, authoritative, yet tinged with unease. "The order's patience wanes, and the buyer grows restless." A second voice, sharp and feminine, retorted, "You promised discretion, collector. If the police sniff our trail, your precious society crumbles." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The collector himself," he whispered to Watson, "and a confederate, likely Madame Dubois from Calais. The plot thickens." Watson's grip tightened on his revolver. "Shall we confront them now?" "Not yet," Holmes cautioned. "Knowledge is our weapon. Let us see what this gallery of theirs reveals." They bypassed the door, seeking a less direct route. A narrow staircase spiraled upward, its steps worn but sturdy. Holmes ascended with cat-like grace, Watson following, his heart pounding with anticipation. At the top, a heavy curtain concealed the doorway. Holmes parted it, revealing a long gallery, lit by flickering oil lamps. The walls were lined with artifacts, golden idols, jeweled daggers, ancient manuscripts, each displayed with reverence. This was no mere thief's hoard. It was a museum of stolen history. "Good Lord," Watson breathed, awestruck. "This must be worth a king's ransom." Holmes's gaze swept the room, cataloging each item with clinical precision. "The Order of the Saffron Veil doesn't merely steal for profit, Watson. They collect power symbols of influence, relics, that bind men to their cause. The Star Sapphire is but one piece in their mosaic. He moved to a glass case at the gallery's center, its surface pristine amidst the manor's decay. Inside, a velvet cushion lay empty, its indentation shaped for a gem the size of a pigeon's egg. Holmes's fingers brushed the case, finding no lock, only a hidden latch. He pressed it, and the case opened with a soft click, releasing a faint whiff of lavender, the same scent from Lord Ashbourne's estate. "The sapphire was here," Holmes said, his voice taut. "Recently. The lavender suggests our thief's signature, a taunt or a mark of pride." Before Watson could respond, a creak echoed from the staircase. Holmes's hand shot up, signaling silence. Footsteps approached, deliberate and heavy. A shadow loomed beyond the curtain, and Holmes pulled Watson behind a massive statue of Anubis. The curtain parted, revealing a burly man in a dark coat, his face scarred and his eyes scanning the gallery with suspicion. A guard, Watson realized, his pulse quickening. The guard's gaze lingered on the open case, and he muttered a curse. Drawing a knife, Holmes's hand rested on Watson's arm, a silent command to hold. The guard turned, his limp pronounced the same tread Holmes had noted outside. He shuffled toward a tapestry on the far wall, lifting it to reveal a hidden panel. With a press, the panel slid open, exposing a narrow passage. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Our path forward, Watson, but we must be swift." As the guard disappeared into the passage, Holmes and Watson followed, slipping through the panel before it closed. The passage was a claustrophobic tunnel, its walls damp and lined with flickering torches. The air grew colder, the voices from below louder. They descended a spiral stair, emerging into a subterranean chamber aglow with candlelight. At its center stood a table, surrounded by three figures. The collector, a tall man in a saffron robe, Madame Dubois, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, and a wiry man with a serpent tattoo on his wrist, clutching a ledger. Holmes crouched behind a crate. Watson at his side as the collector spoke. "The sapphire is safe, but the exchange must be flawless. The buyer arrives tomorrow at dawn. Any misstep, and the order's plans unravel." Madame Dubois sneered. "Your plans, you mean? I've risked too much to see my share squandered." The tattooed man snorted. "Enough bickering. The ship's ready, and the lighthouse is secure. The sapphire will be gone by sunrise." Holmes's fingers tightened on Watson's shoulder. "The lighthouse," he whispered. "Our final destination. But first, we need evidence." He scanned the chamber, spotting a satchel near the table, its contents spilling papers, a glinting cufflink, and a small vial of lavender oil. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The lavender wasn't just a scent. It was a calling card, a ritual of the Order's inner circle. He needed that satchel. "Watson," he murmured, "create a diversion. Nothing lethal, just enough to scatter them." Watson nodded, his soldier's instincts kicking in. He picked up a loose stone and tossed it across the chamber, striking a candelabrum. It crashed to the floor, flames licking the dry wood. The trio at the table startled, shouting as they rushed to douse the fire. Holmes seized the moment, darting to the satchel and pocketing the vial and a folded map fragment before retreating. But the collector's sharp eyes caught the movement. "Intruders!" he roared, drawing a pistol. The chamber erupted into chaos. Madame Dubois fled toward a side exit, while the tattooed man lunged for Holmes. Watson fired a warning shot, the bullet grazing the ceiling, sending plaster raining down. Holmes grabbed Watson, pulling him toward the passage as the collector's pistol barked, a bullet splintering the crate beside them. They raced up the spiral stair, the guard's shouts echoing behind. The passage twisted, branching into a maze of tunnels. Holmes's memory guided them, his steps unerring despite the darkness. They emerged into the gallery, only to find the tapestry flung aside and the limping guard blocking their path, knife gleaming. End of the line. The guard growled, advancing. Holmes's cane flashed, parrying the knife with a metallic clang. Watson tackled the guard, pinning him to the floor. "Go, Holmes," he shouted, struggling to hold the thrashing man. Holmes hesitated, then bolted for the staircase, trusting Watson to follow. He reached the atrium, but the front door burst open, revealing two more guards. Thinking fast, Holmes overturned a decayed table, its crash buying him seconds. He spotted a loose floorboard, prying it up to reveal a trapdoor, a relic of the manor smuggling past. He dove through, landing in a damp cellar as footsteps thundered above. Watson joined him moments later, breathless but unharmed. "That was too close," he panted. Holmes held up the map fragment, its edges torn but legible. "Worth the risk, Watson. This points to the lighthouse exchange. The collector is desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes." They navigated the cellar's tunnels, emerging into the foggy night. The manor's lights flickered behind them, a beacon of danger left behind. Holmes unfolded the map fragment, its ink smudged but revealing a coastal location, a remote lighthouse where the Sapphire would change hands. Watson's face lit with resolve, the thrill of the chase overriding his fatigue. The collector's shadow grows clearer, Holmes said, his voice steady. "We've unmasked his lair, his allies, and his plan. Tomorrow we end this." Watson nodded, the map fragment a tangible promise of victory. The Sapphire was within reach, but the collector's cunning lingered, a specter they would face at dawn. Chapter 10. The Smuggler's Den. Damp air of London's underbelly clung to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson as they descended a rusted iron ladder into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the docks. The map fragment, torn and stained with salt, had led them here, a smuggler's den, a warren of passages carved into the city's forgotten foundations. The Star Sapphire, that elusive celestial gem, was close. Holmes could feel it in the prickling certainty that guided his every step. The collector, a shadowy figure orchestrating the theft, had fled their grasp at the manor, but the hidden message scrawled in the den's walls, a cryptic scrawl of initials and numbers, had revealed his destination. Now the chase drew them into the city's dark veins. The ladder groaned under their weight, its bolts loose in the crumbling stone. Holmes, clad in a coarse dockworker's coat to blend with the surroundings, moved with the precision of a cat, his eyes darting to every shadow. Watson, less accustomed to such clandestine ventures, gripped the ladder tightly, his breath visible in the chill air. The faint drip of water echoed, mingling with the distant clatter of cranes and the muffled shouts of dockhands above. The tunnel's entrance was concealed behind a stack of rotting crates, a clever disguise that Holmes had spotted only by the faint wear on the wood marks of frequent, secretive use. "Holmes," Watson whispered, his voice taut as they reached the tunnel floor. "This place feels like a tomb. Are you certain the collector is here?" Holmes's lips twitched into a faint smile, his eyes glinting in the dim light of their lantern. "Certain? No, Watson. But the evidence is compelling. The message we found, C to D, third tide, points to this den and the tide tables. Confirm a shipment tonight. The collector is no fool. He'll be here to secure his prize." Watson adjusted his coat, his revolver a reassuring weight in his pocket. "And if it's a trap, then we shall be the ones to spring it," Holmes replied, his tone sharp with anticipation. He gestured toward the tunnel ahead, its walls slick with moss and etched with the scratches of countless illicit passages. "Stay close and mind your step. These tunnels are as treacherous as their masters." The passage twisted, narrowing, until the walls seemed to press in, the air thick with the scent of brine and decay. Holmes moved with purpose, his lantern casting jagged shadows that danced like specters. The map fragment, now tucked in his pocket, had been maddeningly vague, rough sketch of tunnels with a single marked chamber, but Holmes had pieced together its meaning with the tide schedule and a dockworker's overheard mutter about the deep hold. The den was a hub for smugglers, a place where stolen goods changed hands under the city's nose. The Star Sapphire, if Holmes's deductions held, was the centerpiece of tonight's exchange. A faint scuffle ahead halted them. Holmes raised a hand, and Watson froze, his hand on his revolver. The sound came again, a scrape, followed by a low curse in a guttural voice. Holmes dimmed the lantern, plunging them into near darkness, and crept forward. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, its ceiling braced with warped timbers. Crates were stacked haphazardly, some marked with foreign script Russian, perhaps, or Dutch. A single oil lamp hung from a beam, casting a sickly yellow glow over three figures huddled near a crate. Holmes crouched behind a barrel, motioning Watson to do the same. The men were rough, their clothes stained with tar and salt, their voices low but urgent. One, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, clutched a crowbar, while another, wiry and nervous, kept glancing toward the tunnel's exit. The third, cloaked and hooded, stood apart, his posture rigid. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The cloaked figure's hands, gloved but slender, betrayed a refinement that clashed with the den's squalor. The collector, Holmes murmured, barely audible. Watson's pulse quickened. The man's presence confirmed their trail, but the Sapphire's location remained elusive. The scarred man spoke, his voice a low growl. "You sure this buyer's coming, sir? Tide's turning soon, and I don't like waiting in this rat's nest." The cloaked figure, presumably the collector, responded, his voice smooth, almost cultured, but edged with impatience. "The buyer will come, Grimes. He's paid half already. The Star Sapphire is too rare to pass up, and he knows it." Grimes spat on the floor. "And if the coppers sniff us out?" That manor job went sourherd. There was a toff poking around. The collector's hood shifted, as if scanning the shadows. Holmes pressed himself lower, his mind racing. The manor job, their infiltration of the Order of the Saffron Vales meeting house, had rattled the syndicate. The collector was cautious, but not cautious enough to abandon his plan. "They'll find nothing," the collector said coldly. "The Sapphire is secure, and our tracks are covered. Now, open the crate. I want to see it one last time before." The exchange. Watson's breath caught. Holmes's hand tightened on his arm, a silent command to wait. Grimes pried open the crate, revealing a velvet-lined box. The wiry man lifted it, his hands trembling, and opened it under the lamps. Light, a flash of deep blue, caught the glow, the Star Sapphire, its facets shimmering like a captured night sky. Watson's heart thudded. They were so close, yet the chamber bristled with danger. Holmes's eyes flicked to the chamber's edges, noting two other tunnels branching off. One, narrow and dark, likely led deeper into the den. The other, wider, bore the marks of heavy traffic, perhaps the route to the docks. A plan formed in his mind, swift and precise. They needed to isolate the collector, secure the gem, and escape before the buyer arrived. But the guards were a problem, and the tunnels were a maze. "Watson," Holmes whispered, his voice a thread of sound. "When I move, follow. Aim for the narrow tunnel to the left. It's our best chance." Watson nodded, his jaw set. Holmes reached into his pocket, producing a small glass vial, a chemist's trick, a compound that would burn brightly but briefly. He uncorked it, waited for the guards to turn toward the crate, and tossed it toward the far wall. The vial shattered, erupting in a flare of white light and acrid smoke. The guards shouted, stumbling back, their eyes blinded by the sudden blaze. Holmes sprang forward, a shadow among shadows, and tackled the wiry man, knocking the velvet box from his hands. It hit the ground, the sapphire skittering across the stone. Watson lunged for it, but the collector was faster, scooping it up and bolting for the wider tunnel. Grimes roared, swinging his crowbar, but Holmes dodged, his movements fluid, and delivered a precise jab to the man's temple. Grimes crumpled, senseless. After him? Holmes shouted, already running. Watson scrambled to his feet, the smoke stinging his eyes, and followed. The narrow tunnel was a gamble, but Holmes's instincts were rarely wrong. The passage twisted, its walls jagged with protruding stones. The collector's cloak flickered ahead, a specter in the gloom. The chase was relentless, the tunnels. Turns disorienting. Watson's lungs burned, but he kept pace, driven by the sapphire's allure and Holmes's unyielding resolve. The collector was nimble, his knowledge of the tunnels evident as he ducked through a low archway. Holmes followed, his coat catching on a jagged stone, tearing with a sharp rip. Watson grabbed his arm, steadying him. "He's heading for the docks," Holmes panted, his eyes blazing with focus. "There's a boat he means to escape by water." They emerged into a larger chamber, its ceiling open to the night sky through a grate above. The stench of the Thames was overpowering, mingled with the tang of tar and fish. A small skiff bobbed in a shallow canal, tethered to a rusted ring. The collector was there, fumbling with the rope, the sapphire glinting in his hand. "Stop!" Watson bellowed, his revolver drawn. The collector froze, his hood falling back to reveal a sharp, angular face, eyes wild with desperation. Holmes stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Sir Malcolm Ashbourne," he said, the name cutting through the damp air. "Your game is over. Hand me the sapphire." Watson's jaw dropped. Sir Malcolm, Lord Ashbourne's cousin, the man they'd dined with at the ball, was the collector? The revelation stunned him, but Holmes's expression held no surprise, only the cold satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Malcolm's lips curled into a sneer. "You're too late, Holmes. The buyer's waiting, and this gem is my salvation." "Your salvation?" Holmes said, stepping closer, his gaze locked on Malcolm's. "You stole from your own kin, betrayed. Your name, all for debts you couldn't pay. The Order of the Saffron Veil was your tool, but you're no mastermind, just a desperate man." Malcolm's hand trembled, the sapphire catching the faint moonlight filtering through the grate. "You know nothing of my burdens," he spat. "Reginald flaunted his wealth, his title, while I scraped by. This sapphire will set me free." Watson tightened his grip on the revolver, but Holmes raised a hand, signaling restraint. "Free?" Holmes said, his voice low, almost pitying. "You're trapped, Malcolm. The syndicate won't let you walk away, not with their prize. Give me the sapphire, and I'll ensure you face only the law, not their knives." Malcolm hesitated, his eyes darting to the skiff, then back to Holmes. The moment stretched, taut, as a wire. Then, with a cry of rage, he hurled the sapphire toward the canal. Holmes dove, his fingers grazing the gem as it spun through the air. It splashed into the water, vanishing into the murky depths. "No!" Watson shouted, but Holmes was already moving, stripping off his coat and plunging into the canal. The water was frigid, its current tugging at him, but his hands searched the silty bottom, fingers brushing stones and debris. Watson aimed his revolver at Malcolm, who stood frozen, his bravado crumbling. "Stay where you are," Watson growled, his heart pounding. The seconds dragged, the only sound the lapping water and his own ragged breaths. Then Holmes surfaced, gasping, the sapphire clutched in his hand, its blue glow muted by the water's grime. Malcolm lunged for the skiff, but Watson fired a warning. Shot, the crack echoing in the chamber. The man froze, hands raised, his face a mask of defeat. Holmes climbed out, drenched but triumphant, the sapphire secure. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the cold. "Bind him. We'll take him to the authorities, along with the gem." Watson produced a length of rope from his satchel, securing Malcolm's wrists as the man muttered curses. The sapphire, now in Holmes's pocket, felt like a hard-won prize, but the victory was tempered by the knowledge of what lay ahead: the syndicate, the buyer, and the lingering threat of the order dot as they led Malcolm back through the tunnels. The distant sound of boots echoed a patrol, perhaps, or the buyer's men. Holmes's mind was already racing, piecing together the next move. The sapphire was theirs, but the game was far from over. The chamber faded behind them, its secrets buried once more in the dark. Watson glanced at Holmes, marveling at his friend's relentless drive. The Star Sapphire gleamed in his mind's eye, a beacon of their triumph, but the shadows of the smuggler's den whispered of dangers yet to come. Chapter 11. The Traitor Revealed. The gaslights of London flickered like wary sentinels as our hansom cab rattled toward Grosvenor Square, where the grand edifice of Lady Ashbourne's annual gala blazed against the night. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and anticipation, for tonight Sherlock Holmes had declared the net would close around the thief of the Star Sapphire. I, Dr. John Watson, sat beside him, my pulse quickened by the weight of our mission. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of clues and shadows, from the smuggler's den beneath the docks to the stormy cliffs of Calais, each revelation drawing us closer to the elusive gem. Now, Holmes's eyes gleamed with the certainty of a predator closing in on its quarry. Sir Malcolm Ashbourne, Holmes had said that morning, his voice low over our breakfast at 221B. The collector, Watson, cousin to Lord Reginald, a man of impeccable lineage and ruinous debts. The ledger from the Order of the Saffron Veil named him, and the map fragment from the manor confirmed it. Tonight we shall confront him. I had stared, incredulous. Sir Malcolm? But he was at the ball when the sapphire vanished. How could he orchestrate such a theft? Holmes's smile was thin. A man in debt is a man in chains, Watson. He had motive, means, and opportunity. The lavender scent, the red clay, the serpent cuff-linked all threads leading to his door. Tonight, at the gala, we shall unravel him. The gala was a spectacle of opulence, held in the gilded ballroom of Lady Ashbourne's townhouse. Chandeliers cast prisms of light across silks and satins, and the air hummed with the chatter of London's elite. As we entered, Holmes's gaze swept the room, cataloguing every face, every gesture. I followed, my hand brushing the revolver in my coat pocket, a precaution Holmes had deemed necessary. Sir Malcolm stood near a marble pillar, his tall frame clad in a tailored evening suit, his silver hair catching the light. His smile was polished, but his eyes darted nervously, betraying the strain beneath his composure. Beside him, Lady Ashbourne, resplendent in emerald silk, greeted guests with practiced grace. Count Orlov, the Russian ambassador, loomed nearby, his mustache bristling as he conversed with Madame Carlotta Bellini, whose laughter rang like a bell. Ezra Finch, the jeweler, hovered at the edges, his fingers twitching as if longing for a gem to appraise. Holmes leaned close, his voice a murmur. Observe, Watson. Sir Malcolm's left hand never strays far from his waistcoat pocket. A nervous habit or a man guarding something precious. I nodded, my eyes fixed on our quarry. The sapphire? Or a key to its location, Holmes replied. We must draw him out. A public confrontation will force his hand. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a shadow, his presence commanding yet unobtrusive. I followed, marveling at his ability to blend into such a gathering, while missing nothing. He paused to exchange pleasantries with Lady Ashbourne, his compliments on her hospitality laced with probing questions about her cousin's recent travels. "Sir Malcolm has been abroad, I hear," Holmes said, his tone casual. "Paris, perhaps? Or further afield?" Lady Ashbourne's smile faltered. "He mentioned a brief trip to the continent. Yes, business," he said. "But he's been rather preoccupied since the theft." Holmes's eyes gleamed. Preoccupied indeed. We moved toward Sir Malcolm, who was now engaged in conversation with a young viscount. Holmes waited, his patience a coiled spring, until the viscount drifted away. Then, with a nod to me, he stepped forward. "Sir Malcolm," Holmes said, his voice clear enough to draw nearby eyes. "A word, if you please." The man turned, his expression a mask of civility. "Mr. Holmes, is it? And Dr. Watson. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes's smile was razor-sharp. "A matter of family honor, sir. The Star Sapphire stolen. From your cousin's estate. I believe you know more than you've let on." A hush rippled through the nearby guests. Sir Malcolm's face paled, but he recovered swiftly, his laugh forced. "Preposterous. I was as shocked as anyone when the gem vanished. Were you?" Holmes's voice was silk over steel. "Then perhaps you can explain the ledger of the Order of the Saffron Veil, which lists you as the collector orchestrating the sapphire's theft, or the map fragment found in your manor, pointing to a smuggler's den, or indeed the key in your pocket, which I suspect unlocks a safe deposit box containing the gem or evidence of its sale." Sir Malcolm's hand twitched toward his waistcoat, then froze. The crowd murmured, eyes wide. Lady Ashbourne gasped, her fan stilled. Count Orlov's brows rose, while Madame Bellini's lips parted in a silent question. Finch, I noted, edged toward the door. "You have no proof," Sir Malcolm said, his voice low, but a bead of sweat betrayed him. Holmes stepped closer, his presence commanding the room. "On the contrary. The lavender scent at the crime scene your cologne, I believe, a gift from a Parisian admirer. The red clay on your boots, traced to a quarry near Dover, where you met Captain Varkas. The serpent cufflink, dropped in your haste to flee the Order's meeting house. Shall I continue?" Sir Malcolm's composure cracked. "This is slander." "I demand—" "You demand nothing," Holmes interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. "But let us test your innocence. Empty your pockets, sir. If the key is not there, I shall retract my accusation." The crowd held its breath. Sir Malcolm's eyes darted, seeking an escape, but the press of onlookers hemmed him in. With a trembling hand, he reached into his waistcoat and produced a small brass key, its surface etched with a bank's insignia. A collective gasp rose. "Watson," Holmes said, his tone calm but urgent. "Take it." I stepped forward, my heart pounding, and seized the key before Sir Malcolm could react. He lunged, a desperate cry escaping him, but Holmes was faster, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "Enough," Holmes snapped. "You have played your hand, sir, and lost." Lady Ashbourne stepped forward, her face a mask of anguish. "Malcolm, is this true? Did you betray us?" Sir Malcolm's shoulders slumped, his defiance crumbling. "I had no choice," he muttered. "Debts, creditors breathing down my neck. The Order promised salvation. The sapphire was to be my redemption." The confession hung in the air, a bitter truth. The crowd erupted in whispers, but Holmes raised a hand for silence. "The key, Watson. It will lead us to the sapphire or its trail. Sir Malcolm, you will accompany us to the police. This matter is far from over." As we escorted Sir Malcolm from the ballroom, the key clutched in my hand. I felt the weight of the moment, a traitor unmasked, a family's honor tarnished, yet the sapphire still out of reach. Holmes's eyes met mine, a spark of triumph tempered by resolve. "To the bank, Watson," he said. "The game is not yet won." The cab ride to Scotland Yard was tense. Sir Malcolm silent between us, his face a portrait of defeat. At the station, Inspector Lestrade met us, his skepticism giving way to grudging admiration as Holmes recounted the evening's events. The key was secured, and Sir Malcolm was led away, his fate sealed dot as we returned to Baker Street. The first light of dawn touched the sky. I sank into my armchair, the key's weight still vivid in my memory. "Holmes," I said, "you were masterful tonight. But the sapphire, where is it?" Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling like a question. "The key will tell us, Watson. To the bank tomorrow, and the next thread in this tapestry. For now, rest. We have earned it." Chapter 12. The vault's secret at dawn broke over London with a sullen grayness, as if the city itself mourned the treachery unveiled the night before. In our rooms at 221B Baker Street, the air was thick with the scent of tobacco and the faint tang of Holmes's chemical experiments, abandoned in a corner. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the breakfast table, the brass pea from Sir Malcolm's pocket glinting in the morning light, a talisman of the mystery that consumed us. Sherlock Holmes, his lean frame draped in a dressing gown, paced before the fireplace, his eyes alight with that restless energy that signaled a mind at full tilt. "The key, Watson," he said, pausing to tap his pipe against the mantel, "is not merely a tool, but a confession. Sir Malcolm's collapse last night confirmed his role as the collector, but the Star Sapphire remains elusive. This key to a safe deposit box at the City and Provincial Bank, if the insignia is to be believed, holds the next thread in our tapestry." I turned the key in my hand, its weight deceptively light for the secrets it promised. But what if it's another ruse, Holmes? The sapphire has slipped through our fingers before the fake in Calais, the empty compartment on the midnight gale. Could Sir Malcolm have misled us again? Holmes's smile was a flicker of grim amusement. "A fair concern, Watson, but Sir Malcolm's desperation was genuine. A man cornered by debt and disgrace does not bluff so convincingly. No, the key is our path forward. We must to the bank." At once, the City and Provincial Bank stood on Threadneedle Street, a fortress of stone and iron, its facade as unyielding as the secrets it guarded. The morning bustle of London cabbies shouting, newsboys hawking papers faded as we entered. The bank's marble halls, where the air was cool and the silence heavy. A clerk, his spectacles perched precariously, greeted us with a nod, his demeanor shifting to deference when Holmes presented the key and a letter of authority from Lord Ashbourne, secured through Inspector Lestrade's influence. "Box 472. "Gentlemen," the clerk said, leading us through a labyrinth of corridors to the vault, "a private viewing room is prepared." The vault was a cavern of steel, its walls lined with numbered boxes, each a silent guardian of wealth or scandal. The clerk inserted Sir Malcolm's key alongside his own, and with a click, box 472 slid free. He placed it on a table in the viewing room and withdrew, leaving us alone with our prize. Holmes's fingers moved with surgical precision, lifting the lid to reveal not the Star Sapphire, as I had half hoped, but a single envelope sealed, with red wax and marked with a serpent emblem, the sigil of the Order of the Saffron Veil. My heart sank, but Holmes's expression was one of quiet triumph. "Not the gem, Watson, but a map to it," he said, raking the seal. Inside was a letter, its script elegant yet urgent, penned in Sir Malcolm's hand. "To the Orders Council. The Star Sapphire is secured, as agreed, and awaits transport to the buyer. The exchange is set for the 31st at the lighthouse on Blackthorn Point under cover of storm. The syndicate's agent, code-named Viper, will deliver payment. Burn this after reading." Holmes's eyes scanned the page, his lips curling. "Blackthorn Point, Watson. A remote lighthouse on the Kentish coast, notorious for smugglers. The 31st tomorrow night. We have little time. But the Sapphire itself, I pressed, my frustration mounting. Where is it? Holmes tapped. The letter. Patience, my friend. There is more. He tilted the paper to the light, revealing faint indentations beneath the ink. A hidden message, written in lemon juice, visible only under heat. He produced a match, struck it, and held it near the paper's edge. Words emerged, ghostly at first, then clear. The gem lies with the viper in a silver case, marked with a crescent moon. Trust no one. I stared, the implications dawning. The viper, this syndicate agent? They have the Sapphire? Precisely, Holmes said, folding the letter. Sir Malcolm was but a cog in a larger machine. The order orchestrated the theft, but the syndicate holds the prize. We must reach Blackthorn Point before the exchange. The journey to Kent was a study in contrasts. London's clamor gave way to rolling hills, then to the rugged cliffs of the coast, where the wind howled and the sea churned like a living thing. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt weaving the clues, the lavender scent, the red clay, the serpent cuff-link into a coherent whole. I, too, was lost in thought, the weight of the revolver in my coat a reminder of the danger ahead. Blackthorn. Point was a desolate place, its lighthouse a solitary sentinel against the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The keeper, a grizzled man named Hargreaves, greeted us with suspicion, his eyes narrowing at Holmes's request to inspect the premises. Smugglers, you say? Hargreaves grunted, leading us up the spiral stairs. Aye, there's been queer folk about lately. Lights flashing at night, boats coming too close, but I keep to myself. Holmes's gaze swept the lighthouse's interior, noting the worn steps, the salt-streaked windows. Have you seen a silver case, perhaps? Or a man? Calling himself Viper? Hargreaves shook his head. Nothing like that. Just the usual supplies and my logbook. At the top, the lantern room offered a panoramic view of the roiling sea. Holmes paused, his attention caught by a faint scratch on the floor near the lantern. Curious, he murmured, kneeling. A crescent moon etched into the wood. The Viper has been here. I felt a chill, not from the wind, but from the realization that we were so close to the Sapphire's trail. Is it here, then? Hidden in the lighthouse? Holmes rose, his expression unreadable. Not here, Watson. The crescent mark is a signal, a confirmation of the exchange point. The Viper will come tomorrow night, under cover of the storm. We must prepare. We descended to the keeper's quarters, where Holmes questioned Hargreaves further, his tone deceptively mild. Any visitors recently? A gentleman, perhaps, or a lady with a foreign accent. Hargreaves scratched his beard. There was a woman 2 nights ago. French, by her speech. Asked about the tides, said she was a painter studying the coast. Left a shawl behind lavender-scented. Now I think on it. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The shawl, Mr. Hargreaves? Where is it? The keeper produced a delicate garment, its fabric, embroidered with silver threads. Holmes examined it, his fingers tracing a monogram. C.D. Madame Dubois, he said softly. Our Calais conspirator. She is the Viper Watson, or her agent. The revelation hit me like a wave. Madame Dubois? But she fled Calais after your ruse. A ruse that bought us time, not victory, Holmes replied. She is bolder than I anticipated, and closer to the Sapphire than we are. We must act swiftly. That night, we took lodgings in a nearby fishing village, a cluster of salt-worn cottages where the locals eyed us with curiosity. Holmes spent the evening sketching a map of Blackthorn Point, plotting vantage points for an ambush. I, restless, penned notes for my chronicle, the weight of the mystery pressing upon me. Holmes, I said, as he studied the shawl by lamplight, if Madame Dubois is the viper, why leave such a clue? The shawl, the monogram, it's almost careless. Holmes's smile was enigmatic, careless or calculated. She knows we pursue her, Watson. This shawl is a challenge, a taunt. She believes herself untouchable. The next day dawned stormy. The sky a bruise of purple and gray. We returned to the lighthouse, where Hargreaves agreed reluctantly to keep watch while we scouted the cliffs. Holmes moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the rocky paths for signs of passage. Near a cove. He paused, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. Red clay, Watson, mixed with sand. The same as at Ashbourne Hall, the Viper's Trail. As night fell, the storm broke, rain lashing the cliffs and thunder rumbling like a warning. We took position behind a cluster of boulders, the lighthouses, beam cutting through the darkness. Holmes's plan was simple. Wait for the Viper, observe the exchange, and seize the sapphire. My revolver was at the ready, my nerves taut. At midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her cloak billowing in the wind. Madame Dubois. She carried a silver case, its surface glinting with a crescent moon. Another figure approached, a man in a hooded coat, his face obscured. They spoke in low tones, the words lost to the storm. But the exchange was clear, the case for a satchel, presumably filled with coin. Holmes signaled, and we crept closer, the rain masking our approach. But a misstep my boot on a loose stone betrayed. U.S. Madame Dubois whirled, her eyes locking onto ours. "Holmes!" she hissed, her voice carrying a mix of fury and triumph. She flung the satchel at the man, who fled into the night, and bolted toward the lighthouse. Holmes was after her in an instant, his long strides closing the gap. I followed, my heart pounding as we entered the lighthouse. The spiral stairs echoed. With our pursuit, Madame Dubois's laughter taunting us from above. In the lantern room, she stood, the silver case clutched to her chest. "You're too late, Mr. Holmes," she said, her accent sharp. "The sapphire is mine, and the syndicate will have it." Holmes's voice was calm, deadly. "Open the case. Madame, let us see your prize." With a defiant glare, she complied, revealing not the sapphire, but a bundle of papers. "A decoy," she said, laughing. "The gem is already en route to the syndicate." "You've chased shadows, detective." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Not shadows, madame. Threads." He lunged, seizing the case as she stumbled back. A scuffle ensued, her nails raking his cheek, but I restrained her, my revolver steady. "Watson, the papers," Holmes said, his voice urgent. He rifled through them, his expression darkening. "Shipping manifests coded. The sapphires aboard a vessel bound for Rotterdam, leaving tonight. We have hours, not days." Madame Dubois smirked, unrepentant. "You'll never catch it." Holmes bound her wrists with her own shawl, his movements precise. "Hargreaves," he called. The keeper appeared, startled but compliant. "Detain her until the police arrive. Watson, we must to the docks." As we descended, the storm raged on, a fitting mirror to the turmoil within me. The sapphire was slipping away, yet Holmes's resolve was unshaken. In the village, we secured horses, riding hard for the nearest port. The letter's warning, "Trust no one," echoed in my mind, but I trusted Holmes, as I always had Dot at the docks. The storm's fury masked our arrival. Holmes scanned the ships, his gaze settling on a steamer, the Crescent Dawn, its name a chilling echo of the case's mark. "There, Watson," he said, "our quarry." We boarded, posing as customs officers, Holmes's forged papers flawless. The captain, a nervous man, denied knowledge of the sapphire, but Holmes's search was relentless. In a crewman's locker, we found a hidden compartment and a note, Blackthorn delivery complete. Rotterdam awaits. Holmes's eyes met mine. A spark of triumph. The Sapphire is aboard, Watson. Tomorrow we sail. Satisfying end. The discovery of the coded manifests and the note in the crewman's locker confirms the Sapphire's trail, providing a thrilling resolution to the chapter, while setting up the climactic pursuit in Chapter 13.